It's time for another episode of Summoning Insight here on the Insight on Esports channel. Speaking of the Insight on Esports channel, as we said at the end of the show last week, we actually have launched our Discord, which if you're in Twitch chat, you can use the !Discord command in order to join. We already have like over 1,000 people, I think, in there. The chat this weekend about all the matches that were happening was popping. So if you're looking for a nice, intellectual, adult place in order to have your esports conversation free from the scourge of nephews, this is it for you guys. So it's been a lot of fun so far. We encourage you guys all to join. Also, contained within that channel is for our Grog coin holders. We have created a cryptocurrency through the Rally Network, which does content creators. If you have 25 coins or more, we have a channel in there for you that you can sign up for. If you've connected your Rally account to Discord, in there, we will be doing Q&A with people at the end of the show. That's our first feature that we're going to be adding. Now, you guys might ask, why are we doing a cryptocurrency? Well, the answer to that is that it's a lot easier for us to kind of provide value across a variety of different platforms. And we're starting with this kind of like coin holder channel for Q&A, but we can expand into many things in the future. We can sell exclusive merch. We can do many things with it. So we're getting that rolling right now, and we'll be adding and implementing more features for people. It's a great way to support the show for you guys if you are so inclined. All right. Well, that bullshit out of the way, Thorin, let us talk a little bit about, I think an interesting topic would be starting out by talking about G2 and Fnatic and the fact that probably neither of them are going to be favorites heading into the finals anymore. And this is the duo of teams that has dominated the LEC/EULCS for many years at this point in time. And it seems like the offseason changes, Perks leaving G2, Reckless changing over to from Fnatic to G2. The new players on Fnatic have really kind of hurt these rosters. So what are your initial thoughts having seen these games? And do you think G2 is still going to take it in the final, or are we entering kind of a new era of more competitive teams, especially with Mad Lions having already taken very convincing victories? Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
I can tell you from a narrative perspective, there is zero world in which G2 is going to be considered the underdog in the final anyway, because you know how fans are. They'll be like, well, they were in the low bracket every other time. And then their logic will be like, oh, they've still got the best team, etc. So I don't think I still think they'll be considered a favourite. I think they'll still win the LEC, quite frankly. But the difference is the Fnatic one's the more interesting one to me, because I actually, unsurprisingly, I said this, I expected G2 to be slightly worse. Not worse in the sense of like they can't be as good a team, but just stylistically they would obviously change. Like those things, I know people hate the term intangibles because we're essentially saying something you cannot measure. We're just speculating it exists. But like if that does exist, which listen, experience will tell you there's something that is describing, whether it's like real or not, whether it's a psychological phenomenon. Perks has it like a motherfucker. It's like when people say the it factor, something like that just has it. Like they just have an extra quality about them that has nothing to do with just being really good at the game. Yep. So when you lose someone like that, I mean, you saw it over when you saw Cloud9 play. The guy took it with him. Like, that's just part of who he is. That's who his competitive DNA is. So, unfortunately, I do think they lost a little bit of that when they lost him. I mean, I even saw there was like an interview, well, it wasn't interviews from his stream, I think, where Jankos said that, like, they don't really have a true leader now that Perks has gone. Now, I don't think that matters, by the way. Like I said on Twitter, yeah, the fact that they're not the old G2 doesn't matter. Like, they have the best players in the LEC, so they should still win. You just have to play whatever the current provider in the League of Legends is and just outperform people. So, I think it's entirely possible they still win. To me, it's the Fnatic one that I think is like, as mad as it sounds, I actually think it would have been better for them. This might sound weird to people if they hadn't have made playoffs. Because remember, the same thing happened to them with the last two regular splits, Monty. They were on the last week, it was essentially in other people's hands as to whether they even made playoffs. And yet you're like, you know, a legendary team who's never
They were a big
playoffs.
Underdog in those summer playoffs because they had a very poor end of the season and then managed to turn it on for playoffs, you know. A lot of Reckless Senna that we saw was doing really well, but it didn't feel like there was anybody stepping up this time around, and Bwipo didn't have a great split and then kind of continued that rather lackluster performance. So really it was like, who is the carry on this team? Who's going to be the one to take the initiative, right? They seem so passive in many ways.
Well, that's actually the problem, in my opinion, is like, It was bad enough last year because to me, as soon as Caps left that team, people already were like never going to have a reasonable expectation of what the team should accomplish, which is obviously nothing compared to what they could do when they had Caps. Like Nemesis just wasn't that type of player. But it's worse now, in my opinion. Like I don't even look at this Fnatic, and I don't think like other people do. Like, oh yeah, G2 and Fnatic, like it'll be them and Faz. I've never thought they were going to be in the file for 1 second. Like, look at this fucking squad. This team has nothing of the old Fnatic that you think. They don't even play like it. Like, if I actually had to pick the best players now, I'd probably say like upset slightly. Maybe, yeah. And even then, like that's just not the one position that's going to be able to 1v9 the game now, is it? Like that's not really what the game's about. So to me, the problem is like they have to live and die by Bwipo. And as you see, if he ever has a bad series, it's just over, isn't it?
It does seem that they're missing kind of that stabilizing force that Reckless was, and Reckless was a player at least in the last like year or so that has been stepping up. I mean, he did in summer playoffs really step up in a big way. And it just didn't feel like the coordination was really there, which is surprising because you wouldn't think that, you know, plugging in Niski seems very logical and plugging in Upset seems very logical to maintaining Fnatic's identity from last year, if you know what I mean, right? It's not that they were kind of switching to a radically different style by switching out the mid and AD carry, because they managed to pick players who were playing in a similar vein. And yet the coordination just seems really, really off in this scenario. So I'm curious what exactly happened within the team in order to cause that to occur.
I do think, though, that like signing Niski was like the beginning of the end for this team, because as soon as they signed that player, it was like you obviously don't have championship aspirations. Then, like, what this is going to be the mid lane that's going to win the LEC? Fuck off! It's never going to happen. It's just unrealistic. Like think about the other players, right? Here's the one thing you can still say about the LEC to this day: it is still a motherfucking mid laners league. Who are the mid laners doing well right now? Abidage, Humanoid, fucking Larson, maybe if you get shit together. Caps, like it's still a mid laners league. Like I'm sorry, in that mix of people, it's like Niski, mate, you're in the wrong division. Go back to LCS, mate. In the LCS, you could be above average. In the LEC, you are average. That's it. You know.
Yeah. And also, I think like I think Niski did have a fine playoffs performance.
He was all right.
I would say he was one of the better performing players on Fnatic overall, especially because Selfmade and Hillsong, especially Hillsong, were very shaky. And Bwipo. So, but it's not because I'm sitting here saying, okay, Niski was absolutely a standout player. He was just performing better than players who seemed really off their game in the total of these playoffs. So that's not a ringing endorsement of him. And when his purpose as a player and his playstyle is about being more supportive and activating side lanes or the jungler, it's just very awkward when all those lanes, you know, underperform. And especially I think, as you say, like a lot of the European mids have been improving, like Abidage over the last year. Humanoid has been fantastic in the playoffs so far. So it just feels like he's not at the same level or improving at the same rate as some of these players who are a little bit newer to the scene.
I also think if you just look generally at like the Fnatic team, like people have heard, because this is the one split where they didn't even like really keep a lid on it themselves. Like it was alluded to themselves in interviews that there's like internal issues or whatever, which for some reason, by the way, has just been the case, even when they had Caps. Like if you saw the episode that we had where we had, what's that, Jesus on, I think it was on, we had him on the Crackdown. Yep, dude, he actually revealed a story on there where even when Caps was in their team, Reckless used to just have his own fucking room where he just like wouldn't scrim with the rest of the team, just sat like, literally like the sort of shit where if I even joked about it, people would go, that's an outrageous joke, even though I knew it was true the whole fucking time. But anyway, basically, for some reason, they've always had these internal issues. The difference is in the past, this is why people don't understand like the dynamics of personalities are really what make teams run. It's not like how good you are at the game. The point is, in the past, they still had quality enough players that eventually you get it together, you hit a nice little streak in the playoffs, and you forget about it temporarily. You know, you wait till the off season or the next time you lose the finals or something. This time, they've never been able to get it together. Like I don't care how the end of the split ended and they got in the playoffs. Like half of that was just stupid shit, like teams that should never winning games. Like that wasn't Fnatic in those games. So to me, like I have to say that rant I made about Selfmade, mate. fucking chef's kiss on the timing of when I said that. Because I even thought in this playoffs, like, here's the difference. Hylissang will always be called an Inter because that's his style of how he tries to get back into a game. He tries to create plays. And if you're in a negative situation, it's like that fucking copy pasta about Ning. Like, you have to make a stupid ass play even when you're behind. That's your game. The difference is this, right? When Hylissang ints because they're losing, it's going to happen. It's better than just getting choked out, right? I think Selfmade, no joke, was actually trying to be like a hero in these games. He was trying to like 1v9 them. It's just that what you see is what I told you. It doesn't matter how good you are individually, like raw mechanical skill as a jungler. It's the role that interfaces with the rest of the team. So if you don't have synergy with those other players, you aren't going to be able to do anything, mate. Like it's not like 7 years ago where you could 1v9 people. You can't do that now. It's not the meta for it, is it?
No, it isn't. We're going to get back to the LEC conversation, I think, a little bit later. We do have Dylan Falco on the show, who I'm very excited to talk to.
We should ask him because he obviously used to be the coach of Fnatic himself, right? So I'm sure.
So there's lots of stuff we're going to talk to him about. First off, Schalke's performance has been really good over the playoffs overall. I'm very curious about how it was to prep for two very different teams in Fnatic and Rogue over the same weekend. I think that's probably very difficult. And then also his experience with Fnatic previously is also going to be really interesting, and his insights into that team. So yeah, there's going to be a ton to talk about with Dylan. First, though, we do have Allorim, who's been an analyst on the LCS broadcast, coming up, and we get to talk to him about the Fiestas. I'm sure a lot of you are here because you want to hear the shit talk about the TSM 100 Thieves series, which was legitimately tragic in nature, and we're going to get into that. So we'll take a little break here, guys, get Allorim on, and then we'll dive into those games because they were awful. We'll see you guys in a few minutes. All right, we're back now with more Summoning Insight with our guest here, Allorim, who is on the LCS broadcast right now. He is also on a Proving Grounds team whose logo is a cat toilet paper roll.
That's
and he's fresh off, as I said on Twitter, cleaning up the shit that is TSM Academy. So after TSM invested all this money, Reggie's announcements, oh boy, TSM, here we come, supporting amateur players. They get cleaned up by the toilet paper cats. How was that game? I'll admit I haven't seen it. I just laughed at the result.
Right. Well, first, I want to say when you're comparing the teams, I'm pretty sure that us Toilet Paper Cat Zeus Gaming, I'm pretty sure we are the team with the least amount of practice out of all the teams in Proving Grounds, because I'm the only player on the team that's not in school or has a part-time job. And so every one of the players on Zeus Gaming has a part-time job or is doing school full-time, right? And so going pro for League for them is something they do on the side, right? So it's already, if you're looking at that, it's wow, how can we just do that? Because academy teams typically scrim 4 or 5 times a week, while we scrim once a week, or maybe even twice if someone gets off work. And so when we're heading into these games, into academy teams as amateur team players, with so little practice, it's just we're kind of raw in the fact that it's all right, let's play the champions we know and have at them, because I think a lot of the players on my team are more motivated to win because they have so much more to prove. And I think that's kind of the Cinderella story of the team that I'm on, is who even are. A lot of people don't even know who anyone is except for myself. And I'm not even that big of a player either. So it's I'm the only one with experience. They call it, Allorim and 4 randoms. And then we go up and everybody was so excited that we beat TSM because it gives the opportunity to shit on anything they do. It's not even... It's not even
also,
I think. Yeah,
maybe some of your teammates and it gives you more clout, and hopefully people are going to take a second look at you guys, right?
Well, I hope so. But it's not even that. I think that TSM Academy has a whole bunch of shit players. I think maybe they didn't look that great because I'm not going to give them that many excuses. They didn't look good, right?
Shouldn't they essentially have one of the best teams on paper though? They've got 2 veterans, Hotzer and Cody Son, and they've got these they've got the fucking 2 Taiwanese players. So I'm guessing they must have some connection through Sword Art or Peter Zhang or someone. They must know that these players have some quality. So this doesn't even look like one of those random teams with nobodies. This looks like they're trying to win Academy.
It's weird, right? Because 3 of their players have been to Worlds, right? Hanser, Babip, and Cody Sun. 3 of them. And so a lot of other players would go damn, they've got 3 players that went to Worlds. They've got an import, 19-year-old Yursan from Taiwan. He's supposed to be a prodigy in mid lane and support. And then they got Sword in mid lane. I think he's all right, but I think that's the weakness. I thought that was the weakness of that team. But it turns out that the entire team was not that great. And I mean, it's been like that the whole split. Maybe it's a matter of motivation, but you'd think that they'd have the talent, right? Because they have so much experience. But, you know, sometimes when you send pros that were in the LCS down to Academy, it's so easy for people to say on social media, like when they're not performing, oh, well, they just don't care, right? But I think that's such a bullshit excuse. And I see it all the time where some big pro will come from the LCS, go down to Academy, they play poorly, and it's, oh, yeah, these guys don't care. Why should they try? They've already proved themselves. I'm like, fuck off, man. If they move down, why shouldn't they be stomping everybody in Academy, right? Unless they are just that much worse.
Well, I mean, I did see Huni int a lot in Academy last year when I was watching those games. So I think it's true that some of them don't care because his performance it was vastly different compared to LCS.
I agree.
By the way,
but
if you just look at the Academy fucking rosters in this tournament, mate, it is just fucking Oceanic region plus Academy from NA. Like, it's going to be terrible next year, Monty, because when they do this rule where they make all the minor regions not count as imports, here's what's going to happen. Nobody's going to be developing NA talent. You're just all going to be developing Turkish, Brazilian, fucking Australian talent. That's all you're going to be doing now with LCS. So it's whatever. Listen, it'll make it a more competitive region, but you're not actually developing NA talent by doing this, guys. Like, you're just now going to gamble on all the fucking Australians, apparently. Like, that's one part that doesn't make any sense. Like, think about this for a second. Just these rosters existing is essentially a fucking vote of no confidence by the coaching staff in NA against themselves. Because if you can find 50 players in Oceanic region that you would like to try for LCS, but not, I don't know, 5 times more NA players, you might not be very good at your jobs. So there aren't any fucking people in Australia. What are you can only play if you're on like one part of the country even. They were literally the products of fucking like criminals sent there, and they're still like kicking your ass like, 100 years later in a video game. Like, what is this? What is this, America?
The other thing that's crazy about Australia is everyone is fucking complaining about the quality of NA solo queue and saying that they can't develop players.
I can't imagine how bad theirs must be.
And yet now we have like FBI and Fudge who are performing at a very good level in LCS. So if that's the excuse, I mean, it can't possibly be true because these guys came from a much worse server. In NA. There are only 20 million people in Australia. There's like 7 kangaroos for one person. Like, they don't even have a population. We have 350 million in America.
Like, you know what, Monty? Here would literally even be my speculation. This is pure speculation because I don't know many Oceanic players. Actually, I wouldn't even know the ones I've had on shows. So I wouldn't claim to have like some cultural insight. I know fuck all about Australians except the joke about them being criminals and Chad from CSGO. No, but what I would say is this, right? If I had to guess, I would guess it's because, well, motherfuckers like Destiny are willing to move across the world and try like everything they can to make it. Now, they didn't make it. Like, they've sort of made it and failed. But if I had to guess, in fact, this is what I'd like to tie in and ask Allorim about. If I had to guess, a lot of those players who are in Academy or at that level, if they either had a chance and didn't make it, or they don't think they're going to get the chance, I'd imagine they aren't like killing themselves life or death to try and get an LCS. It's more like if it happens, it happens. Cool. If it doesn't, okay, it didn't.
When it comes to the Australian players, it's just when the region gets disbanded like that, obviously the best of the best will come to NA, and I'd say that's people like Fudge, FBI, King, Lost. Those are like the best of Oceania, right? And then the rest, like we've seen a couple top laners and junglers. I honestly think there was I was talking to one of the coaches before Split when I was looking for a team before Split started, and there was heavy bias toward picking up Oceanic players because they felt pressured into pick. I don't know if Riot pressured them into it, but they said themselves that they were pressured into, you know, picking up more Oceanic players because I guess in what they see is that the Oceanic region got disbanded and there's just no future there. So it's like there's all these new guys that need to be picked up, and you know, you don't want everyone to lose their jobs. So they just wanted to, you know, save some lives, I guess, and pick up Oceanic players. And even if there is like, at least in my mind, some more deserving players that take the spot. So I'm not going to sit here, you know, they took my job kind of thing going on. But I do think there was a lot of bias into picking up Oceanic players just because they needed a place to go. And I think there's a league right now actually in Oceania because they still have a world spot from what I know. But it's run by a league that's not run by Riot. It's run by the Direwolves, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
So there is still a competitive scene in Oceania, but it's like it's really whack, and I don't think like it gets many viewers, but it still exists.
It's interesting that they have a spot still. I
Right.
I didn't even know that. Okay, well, there we go. All right, let's
They
move
even
on.
apparently have an MSI spot for the same reason. Because I've just looked it up. Yeah,
Jeez.
it's something like ESL tournament.
It's really weird, right? It doesn't make any sense, but that's what it is.
All right, so let's talk now about the actual playoff matches this last weekend, and we'll kick it off with what I said on Twitter was probably one of, if not the worst playoff match I have ever seen in terms of quality. It is, of course, TSM versus 100 Thieves. It was so bad, and I was tweeting the lyrics to Papa Roach's Last Resort, saying, cut my life into pieces. This is NA's top 4. And then people were reporting my tweets for suicide risk. So I actually started getting emails from Twitter, which are very supportive, by the way. And if you are in a dark place, like I said on Twitter, there are professionals you can reach out to for help on this. But this is what fans were interpreting from my tweets and from watching the game was that, guys, but you don't have to worry about me. I'm fine. See, the thing about this is I can always just turn off the TV and the despair will end, right? I can go watch some other playoff games in other regions and the despair will end. So I have a way out. Don't worry about me. I'm okay.
Here's the positive though, Monty. There's a silver lining to the match of 100 Thieves TSM, and here's the silver lining. Anytime someone, because y'all are bad at doing this, I know how to actually attack people's points. Anytime anyone wants to make the point to LS not to go too ham, that draft is everything, this series proves it, mate. Like, literally, this looked like TSM was trying to make a point just to LS that they could draft doesn't make sense and still win the game. You know what I mean? Like, 100 Thieves didn't even matter if 100 Thieves looked like they had won a draft game, like they were never going to win in the actual server. It was like fucking outrageous.
This was so painful because it looked like this could have been 100 Thieves 3-0 and probably should have been. Yes, great series. TSM getting 3-0'd.
That would have been hilarious. I would have been the biggest 100 Thieves fan for a weekend.
It makes no sense. And they won the 100 Thieves had some draft wins because it looked like you're just watching the same game over and over again where 100 Thieves gets all the dragons. Somehow TSM manages to win. It defies the logic of the game. It's like, oh yeah, this team drafted for good early game. They got counter picking lanes, shoving lanes. They're going to get the dragon scale and win. And so you're watching it. Okay, 100 Thieves, 4th Dragon Soul. Yes, they finally did it. Lose the team fight to TSM, lose the game.
I like how they would lose. They would just into team fight at 23 minutes every game, or just give up Baron either through a steal or for TSM sneaking it with 3 people after 2 of TSM's players dive bot in that last game. They would be on Soul Point by 20 minutes and still somehow just not be able to wait long enough to not int. The whole thing was just so fundamentally mind-boggling. You see someday in these great matchups, what's your take as a top laner looking at what was going on, because it was just this Jace Gnar matchup for 3 games in a row. Tell us about that matchup and how you think it should play out.
I mean, in historically the Jace is supposed to be diving the Gnar, right? And we saw the Jace being dove by the Gnar by level 4. I wish we had ProView still so I could see it exactly.
I know, me too, buddy.
Exactly how it went. So I could either flame someday, for not playing right, or praise Huni for playing it really well. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see all of it, but it defies the logic of how the matchup is supposed to go. I have heard a lot of people say that they think Gnar actually starts winning after Ninja Tabby. But in the early lane phase, Jace is supposed to be super far ahead, which we never saw. But the fact that they kept doing it and that Huni kept on blinding Gnar, they didn't ban Jace, so they left it up. It's like, that means they didn't give a shit, man. Either Huni's going, he can't play it, or they believe in the matchup is not that one-sided. So, I mean, it's just pretty funny that they do try the same thing 2 times and it doesn't work again, and then they tried a 3rd time.
Well, what's also just wild to me is that they kept picking Nidalee and Gnar together often, like especially in game 1 with an Orianna. Like, where, as a Nidalee, where do you gank in these solo lanes? Like, this is atrocious. You shouldn't be getting pressure. You shouldn't be getting kills. You shouldn't be losing the 2v2 in these scenarios. So I don't even know what the draft strategy was or why this priority was existing on these particular champions, especially blinding them, like you're saying a lot of the time.
I think it's just a speaker's preference and in nothing more than that, because like you said, when you pick Nidalee, you mainly want to have some kind of setup in the mid lane, right? Like in top lane,
top Renekton, you know.
Yeah, you can have the Renektons or anything with CC really. And mid lane, it's a little harder right now, but you could do like Nidalee Syndra, and more common than not right now is Nidalee Lucian, something like that. And that's not for setup in the lane. That's just to get priority and invade in jungle. But you're right, like they didn't have setup in the lanes, right? And so it seemed like TSM would pick these champions, wait for 35 minutes to play the game, and then just have a team fight and somehow win because 100 Thieves fucked it up. And so the draft itself didn't make sense, but the wins kept coming, so they kept doing it, right? And to them, it's what isn't broken, or what isn't falling apart to the ground and into the trash compactor. Don't change it. Don't fix it.
What I find so frustrating about this is because TSM changes their players, they change their coaching staff, but the way that if we rewind time to last summer, and I was so frustrated because TSM kept winning because every team would just fall on their face and just not punish.
They
like
get
Zillion
for some
mid.
reason. They always, some reason in the, like, I know exactly what you mean. From that, exactly that playoffs, it's like every time TSM was about to lose the game, it's like they just had a button that was like, make the enemy, mind control the enemy into us.
Yes,
they're like, you know what, press the button, we need to get back in the game. Because the same here, you're right, every time they're down in the game, the other teams, even Team Liquid was doing it in that series. Team Liquid won. Like, let's just give them a bunch of free kills for no reason when we have like map control, vision, everything you could need. It's one of those areas, by the way, where that's one thing, because actually LS has very similar thinking to you in this sense, Monty. When people can't understand that they're ahead in the game and they even control the factors that keep you ahead in the game and just opt into fights that are like 50-50s, I'll never understand that ever, mate. I mean, maybe it's because I come from games like fucking Quake, StarCraft, where you, like, the whole time you're cognizant of who is in control of the game, and if you're in control of the game, like how you can lose the game effectively. What's weird is in NA, it's almost like because they're ahead, they think it's even better to take wild fights because I'm slightly ahead, but that's actually a terrible reason to take a fight if you're winning the game.
Well, the funny thing is that when you have Dragon Soul, those 50-50 fights are supposed to be like heavily in your favor, even if it's 50. So it goes from 50-50 to like 80-20, but still somehow, despite that, it's an L for the team fight. It's like they took a 90-10 fight, right? And lost it every time. So it defies the logic, right?
Yeah, I know. And what's funny about these two is like I felt like Ryoma was kind of the reverse of Someday this game, when a lot of these games, like, he was doing okay, he was holding up at least in the laning phase, whereas Someday, was playing questionably these matchups. But Sunday's Jace in some of these team fights was like legitimately pretty good the way he was playing them out, and he was getting triple kills or like bringing them back into the game even when he did suffer an early deficit. Ryoma, on the other hand, I don't know why, like, I understand why you would put Someday on Jace, especially in this matchup, to punish the blind Gnar pick, right? Okay, I get it. But Ryoma's not a player that has been playing a lot of AD carries in the mid lane. So to start your first two games and have his kind of abysmal teamfight performance on these champions, and then go down 0-2, keeping in mind that they could have won either of these games if they had performed as a team, and then finally switch him back to Orianna and take a relatively convincing third game in this series, it's just a mystery to me. Like, I don't understand their game plan coming into this week, because if the logic here, let's just go through the logic. If the logic to playing Ryoma is, okay, we want to play control mages, we're playing into this guy's specialty because it suits the meta, then why do you start your playoff best of 5 running him on 2 AD carries, right? Because at that point, why don't you play Damonte? Is the
because
question.
We don't live in a world where anyone actually is coaching a player called Ryoma, Monty. They still think, after fucking like 11 years of competitive League of Legends, that this is Magic the Gathering and their deck has the strong character in it. So it's like, but I must pick Lucian, it's really strong. Now, not for your team, it isn't. You understand that? Maybe an AD carry. Not in mid lane, it ain't. So I don't ever want to see it on your team, 100 Thieves. You don't have the player personnel.
And so my biggest problem with that, and I've discussed this before, is that and you said it before, when you play Ryoma, you're switching stylistically of what you were known for early on when you were playing with Damonte. My biggest problem with that is that when I see 100 Thieves play these kind of slow control mage style where you play, you scale and play for team fights, they can do that, but they do it worse than like the other top teams, right? And so I liked it when Damonte was in because at least they had their own style, right? They were pretty good. I'd say they were pretty damn good about doing those dives in the early game. And when you plan on playing Jace the entire weekend, right? You played 3 games of Jace. Doesn't it make more sense to revert back to kind of that old style where you're going around playing top dives or bot dives? So stylistically on their draft, it didn't make sense on why they played Ryoma. And I don't know if Ryoma played any Twisted Fate to split. I know he picked Twisted Fate during the Immortals, when Immortals had that fire and or maybe it was just like a drill where they had to leave and remake the entire game. And they remade the entire draft. I don't know if you guys saw that.
Yeah.
So they showed that they were willing to play Twisted Fate, but I don't know if they ever brought it out after that. And it's so strange to me that they went from a team that seemed like they were so good at this one style. And who cares if that's your one-trick pony style? I mean, even, Fun Plus Phoenix kind of played that style the entire time of Worlds, and then they won.
Well, different meta, to be fair.
Yeah, it is a different meta.
So let's be clear. Fun Plus Phoenix would not have won Worlds had that not been the meta. Right. I think we can say that.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not saying that would make 100 Thieves the best team in NA.
Yeah,
but not. I think it's better than having them be like the 4th or 5th best control mage team fighter team.
Sure. But at the same time, I totally agree with that point. I just don't think that they would be fundamentally better. Like, do we think that they could have won this series with Damonte? And what's the ceiling? Like, for me, I expected them to be a top 4 team coming in. They are a top 4 team. Do I think that they could have won this series with Damonte? I still would favor TSM coming into it. So, I mean, what kind of difference in performance are we talking about, right? My issue is the following. Like, my issue is if you want to play Ryoma, don't play him on 80 carries. Commit to the mage strategy, right? Commit and like don't play someday on Jace top with these fragile team compositions when your team just gets caught out in the mid game every single time. And I think the other flaw here that you're looking at is, okay, so they did have very good early objective control. They were threatening Soul or Soul Point many times throughout this series. In fact, getting Infernal Soul, still losing with it, right? So I look at this and I say, okay, where is going to be the upside here? Because let's say you're playing a scaling control mage in the mid lane, but your team throws in the late game. How do you win with that? Whether you're having Damonte or Ryoma.
Dude, so you're playing against Power of Evil as well, so all you're doing is just playing against an even better scaling fucking control
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what's the upside here?
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? Is that basically TSM is the better version of this version of 100 Thieves. And so you can, I think that you either like take the wild card and you try and run with Damonte here, but in the end, I really don't think that there was a lot of upside. And I think, in fact, 100 Thieves, like we said, could have 3-0'd this series with Ryoma. All they had to do was not just run it down in some of these team fights and take the advantage that they have. So to me, as much as, it's Ryoma did have kind of a bad performance, especially in game 1 and game 2 on the AD carries, which I disagree that he should have been on in the first place, but I wouldn't start out with that strategy, right? I don't come into, if I'm a coach, if I'm Zix and I'm coming into these playoffs, my game 1 strat is not Ryoma on an 80 carry, right? Yeah. That's what doesn't make sense to me.
One thing I've always found weird as well, by the way, Monty, is like one area that's always been very different between East and West. It's like, this, like a lot of the really great Korean teams, what they like to do if they think they actually like are the better team in a best of 5 is they'll start game 1 with like the most like vanilla draft they have. Because what they actually want to see is like, what is your draft strategy and where are you strong and what are you willing to flex out? And then they'll adapt as the series goes on. I've noticed Western teams always try to come with something wacky in game 1, like it was a best of 1 still. Like, to me, that's whack because put it this way, right? If you try the cheese strat in game 1 or a weird pick, you have no A/B testing if it fails after game 1. Like, you're just back to the complete drawing board of chucking everything you plan. Like, that's something you pull out. Like, if you're down 2 games, it's game 3 and you want to surprise someone, Like, I even think as a metagame strategy, it's quite poor, like, approach to the game in general.
I agree. I agree. I mean, how would you have approached this best of 5, Allorim?
I'm trying to think about it because I think there have been a lot of teams on Thorin's point that do look for this cheese strat on the very beginning. I know we didn't do that, at least on any teams that I had before. In fact, I can think of a best of 5 series I played in the past when I was on Echo Fox still, where we were down 0-2. And that's when we decided to bring out Draven, right? And I think that actually might be a better choice because that gives you momentum back. And momentum's such a big thing in these best of 5 series.
The confidence of your secret pick.
Yeah, exactly. And then they start banning it, right?
But here's the thing, Allorim. Orianna was not a secret pick.
Orianna was not secret. In fact, if they had secret picks, it was probably the ADs, right? They were like,
exactly what I'm saying.
So, I guess it's all up to their practice, right? We don't know their practice. They could have been practicing these ADs the entire time for the past couple weeks, and so they finally bring it out on stage. And when you are in that situation and you're losing, like you're panicking. It's like, well, fuck, our practice isn't working. Let's just go back to our control mages and scale. So in my head, that's what happened because I can't imagine a team wouldn't have practiced it a lot and then just picked it on stage because, it is a good meta pick right now is playing ADs mid with things like Lucian and Tristana are so good right now. So in my head, it's just that they panicked and like it stopped working. And even though their draft ended up a little weird where they got the insane early game and they have the Dragon Soul, like their team fights aren't that great because they have this Jace that didn't get that far ahead. And, while Someday a very good player in team fights, it's not like he had the economy to do as much as he could have had they played the comp a little bit better toward the Jace side. So at the end of the day, they get to this game 3 and they're like, whatever, man, let's just put Ryoma back on a control mage. That's what he team fights better with anyway. I don't think his Tristana is, that great or Lucian is that impressive. So, and after that, they're playing on pure instinct. At least that's how I feel like it's just, okay, let's play how exactly the basics of the game and see if we can win. And they're not really thinking much past that. And at least that's the way I'm seeing it when I'm watching the series.
Yeah, I think too, for me, the most frustrating aspect of this entire series was game 4 as well, when they had such a clear-cut advantage and they head into this fight in the mid lane and it looks like they catch Spica and then Huhi just ults him out of the fight. And so they can't actually finish the kill and then they get wiped out after they have this huge kind of advantage. And theoretically, like they should be like they'd handled the Nocturne pretty well, all things considered. Right. I mean, he's just going to get some kills. That's what happens with the ult. But I was looking at that team fight thinking that this is for sure going to be 100 Thieves victory. And then it just seems like their coordination or their communication is off and they can't even catch the pick that was just kind of delivered to them as well.
Which is really strange because Set has been one of Huhi's best picks. Past. And so it seems like that's what I'm saying at the end of this series. It seems like they're just playing on instinct and they don't really have a set plan or, maybe they've got some nerves going on because going down 0-2 and trying to get that reverse sweep is very nerve-wracking on a player. You just, your heart is pumping the whole time and you never want to make that mistake, but then you do. And it's just like, well, fuck, man, I ruined it.
I was just shocked because I would have thought coming off of the game 3 win and then them being up with such a substantial, I think, advantage in game 4, they would have been feeling very like confident and comfortable about, okay, let's close this one out. Let's go into game 5. We've got the reverse sweep. Come on. And so it was really shocking to me. It was really shocking to me. It is what I think. Yeah.
You never know what they're feeling, but if you think about it logically, right, they won the game and then they've got security on the next game so they can start playing a little bit more relaxed and focused, right? You can win by doing the basics. You don't have to do anything fancy.
Yes. Yeah. You certainly don't have to force things, especially when your opponent is kind of walking into you and giving you those opportunities. It's just a complete throw. But what in terms of watching these teams over the split, because it really just below Team Liquid and C9, everything feels pretty stagnant right now when it comes to the region. And I was, even after some very questionable playoffs last summer, where again there were many problems. This game just felt so egregious in terms of quality of play, and nobody actually winning, just TSM catching a throw.
Yeah. I thought at the very least, Huni has improved significantly from the beginning of the split. I thought, at least in my opinion, right? I think Huni at the start of the split is like, my God, how could they possibly pick up Huni? Jokes about Huni's agent somehow getting him the best deals on the planet. Someone who has looked pretty poor on the previous teams, and ever since Echo Fox 2018, Huni has not looked that good. But I think more recently, Huni has gotten up to that level that he was before. And Huni Nar was a meme at the beginning of the split. It's like, please God, don't pick Nar Huni. And now he's playing into the counter matchup pretty well. So if anything from the series that I'd like to take away from it, it's that Huni has actually gotten back into like a form where I could confidently say that he's a top 3 top laner in the LCS. While Someday on the other hand, is just felt like he's just gone down and down and down. And I did a top lane tier list on the broadcast at one point. I think I put Someday number 3. But I think I was so wrong, because I'm looking at it now and it's like, wow, Someday really isn't as good as he used to be. Or maybe it's just
How long ago did you do the tier list?
It's like
that was
a month ago
midway
or so.
through the split.
Okay, so it wasn't at the beginning. I mean, I do get the sense, by the way, in line with what you're saying. The problem is there was all the years where Someday was like the one bright spot on that team. It was like hard carrying him. So it just feels in your brain like he must be doing fine. But I agree. I think this year he hasn't been anywhere close to what he was the last few years.
And that's actually terrible news for 100 Thieves as well, because if you're banking on the fact that someday getting a green card is going to unlock an import mid laner that you desperately need, right? And all of a sudden someday, as soon as he gets his green card, is like a bottom tier or like bottom 5 top laner in the league, you just have even more problems now if you're 100 Thieves. Like, how do you fix that issue as in terms of your roster?
Well, I think that Someday is a bottom 5 top laner right now. At least he was during the end of the regular split. Yeah, he still plays team fights well, right? At least that's going on for him, but his lane phase has not been as good as it used to be. Maybe they're banking on that Someday has been in NA for so long and he's been with such kind of mediocre teams that his mental boom, and as soon as they like get back to, they get this import mid laner, let's say they just get caps out of nowhere on 100 Thieves, right? 100 Thieves caps. Now Someday's got, it's like the battery life went straight back to 100, right? It's like, oh my God, now I can finally play the game. Maybe that's what they're banking on, because you're right. If Someday's kind of stuck in this position where he's not looking so great, then 100 Thieves' future is looking worrying.
I will say that I think that one of the advantages that 100 Thieves has that is kind of unique to many of the teams that are in North America right now, although some of them also have like bilingual Korean players, is that I'm actually not sure what Huhi's level of Korean speaking is, but obviously Someday is basically fully bilingual at this point in time. So they have the capacity at least to bring in a Korean mid laner and integrate them a lot more effectively than most teams would be able to do, which is a pretty big advantage.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Huhi is fluent in both English and Korean. So that would be.
I think so, but I wasn't entirely sure. But yeah, if you already have 1 or 2 players that are bilingual, it really helps out with making sure any Korean player coming in is comfortable and also capable of learning
so
the
next
language.
year they'll be able to talk to Paul Belter in English and Korean. Cool, that's awesome. It's a cool feature.
I was about to ask, is there any NA native player that could go to 100 Thieves and like solve this problem that we're talking about, or do you think they need some kind of superstar to be going into from another region, whether it's EU or Korea?
I think if they want to actually compete for a title, they need to get a very good mid laner, because.
And you're saying it can't come from NA?
You tell me who's out there. Who's out there?
I mean, who's even hyped?
Is Palafox going to take the next step?
Basically, supposed to be the guy this year.
It's a good question. I'm trying to think of like, which NA mid laner could possibly take 100 Thieves to a title.
Like, is there any guy who hasn't broken out yet that you actually think has the skills? Like some guy with like a mad upside if he becomes what he is in academy or whatever?
Well, I thought that was Palafox earlier.
That's what I heard. That's the hype everyone kept telling me.
Yeah, I played with Palafox myself, and he's really good. Like, he was really good in academy. Obviously, when you go to academy and LCS, you can sometimes be exposed for your weaknesses because you're going to be playing against way better players. And while I don't think Palafox got quote unquote exposed, it's just that Palafox isn't just going to jump from one of the best academy mids to one of the best LCS mids. So I think given time, he can be really good. But that's always the thing with NA, right? Give him time, right? How long do we have to wait until we have someone that is as good, if not better, than Korean or European mid laners, right? Who can tell who is going to be like the next big thing from NA coming from mid lane? I think it's too hard to say, and all we have is hope and dreams, right?
What would you say about your old teammate Insanity? Because he was another player people were touting like last year, for example. So what would you say about where he's at the moment?
I think Insanity's fine for mid lane LCS. In fact, I think he does his job all right. When we played against when I was playing last split with Insanity against the top tier mid laners, like he was playing versus Bjergsen and Niski, he would do okay in lane, but it's not like Insanity is taking any lane advantage and really just going above and beyond for it. He's another one of those play control mage and scale. I feel like if you are one of those players where unless you're Power of Evil, where you just play control mage and scale, you're never going to be like a very great mid laner. I think you have to have some kind of a lot of the times it's with 2v2 with coordination with your mid and jungle, and maybe that just depends on, because we had Insanity X Smithy, and if I'm gonna be honest, I feel like X Smithy toward that end of the Immortals,
he was mailing that one in. Come on, mate, he didn't care.
he I don't know how much
Nobody even knows where he is right now.
I don't even know.
Yeah, we should start putting his photo on the fucking milk carton at this point in time, because nobody actually knows where he is.
To be fair, based on the stories people tell, he's probably just rolling out of bed in some shack somewhere. Like, fucking on that play. Is it the final state? Oh, shit, I'm not on LCS anymore. Never mind. I'll go back to bed.
I think he knew the time was coming, and I didn't see X Smithy playing much league other than scrims, and I think he knew it was about time. But so as for Insanity,
they were going to take him out behind the shed. Is that what's going on?
Oh, Lassie. But yeah, I think Insanity can still grow a little bit, but it's hard to say if I think Insanity will just be like, a top mid laner in the region, because you already have such difficult competition, especially with Perks coming in and raising that kind of level. I don't think we'll be seeing any Perks level mid laners coming from NA anytime soon.
The funny thing is, though, mate,
would be nice,
like obviously, because in theory, mid is the most influential position, and in theory, like the most skilled players tend to play in most of the top regions, right? I understand why logically it is the position you will import for, and it'll have the least talent for. But like the reason why it isn't worth just dismissing completely the idea there could be an NA talent is because, tell you what, in the same way as Dardoch, if he'd ever actually got his shit together, could have done this years ago. If you ever did find a legit talent who played mid lane in LCS, like forget all this resident. Like that's the OP position right there. Like that guy, not only would he get mega paid, but like that you could build championships around that. Like that, like I've always hoped someone would make the breakthrough. But as you say, unfortunately, it either tends to be people like Paul Belter who almost know that their job is like just don't lose the game, basically, which isn't like a winner's mindset. Or it's people where it's like, my job is just play these champions. Like there are like here's the difference, right? Because I thought your distinction was a worthwhile one pointing out, right? When Power of Evil just does that his whole career, of course, yeah, he just plays these mages. The point is, Power of Evil did that coming up in Europe against like the most killer mid laners in the world. So like he does that, but like battle tested. He's not doing that just because it's an option. It's all he can do. Like he does that at an exceptional level. I agree. The problem is, I don't really see anyone in NA who even plays that style who looks like they have like the same like confidence, agency of what they're going to do in the game, like think they can be the best player. I think you're lacking that at the moment, unfortunately.
No, I agree, and so that's why players like Palafox and Damonte, I think they actually had different things going on for them. With Palafox, we saw that he likes playing more of these assassin type mid laners. He's playing Aurelia and Akali a lot over the control mages, and Damonte with his style was more push and move to sides. And so when I see other mid laners from NA just play this control mage wait style, and let's say they get to the LCS, how are they going to compare against the players like Power of Evil, who has done it for so long, against better practice, right? And like you said, he came up against playing some of the best mid laners at the time. And so he comes over here, it's now like he's smurfing on the rest of these guys when you just compare them side to side. So how can you ever expect yourself to become the greatest or the next best NA mid laner when you're playing a style that fundamentally is, it probably just won't work out for you. You're just going to be like a mini me version of something else.
Well, here's what I want, guys, because you talk about either players having like talent or then having some sort of dedication or practice issues or commitment issues, right? So why is it in NA we can either have a player who has natural talent but doesn't have the work ethic, or we have Golden Glue, who no matter how many times he goes to Korea and tries to hyperbolic time chamber himself, he can't be good enough in order to maintain a starting position? Why is it that we can't have the guy who is super good and willing to go to Korea during the offseason to train? Where is that human being? Please give me that guy. Please, please. I'm begging you. What is it about NA?
Well, we talked about that before the show started. Maybe it's just that you are only as good as your practice can get you, right? So let's say you do have that talent and you do have the drive. Unless you are almost exclusively scrimming, someone like C9 or TL, you're probably going to be running into some bad habits, right? Playing against other players who make the games kind of goofy. Sometimes scrims can be too limit testing and, you're just getting all these bad habits. So maybe it comes from that. It's kind of hard to say that whereas the Super Saiyan of North America, the 1 in a million, and I don't know where to find him, and I don't know how to fix it because I'm not a coach. But by God, man, Broly's coming soon. He's just out somewhere, ready to come.
It's basically what actually makes Koreans OP. Like, in my opinion, from what I've seen culturally, Chinese people aren't even like this. They just have an unlimited amount of people, colloquially, to thwart the problem until they find the right people. The difference in Korea is this, right? Because I've noticed, because obviously, my main game's Counter-Strike, which is basically just a Western game. It's just Americans and Europeans pretty much just playing that game, right? I can tell you there's a pretty strong distinction there where you have tons of players who have incredible talent and you have tons that are really smart players who don't have that much talent. It tends to be that divide. The guy who has the mad skills doesn't tend to be the smartest because he didn't, basically the threshold to do the correct thing in the game was lower because he's so skilled. Meanwhile, the guy who's like the support player, he has to be a genius. He doesn't have the best skills, he doesn't get all the positions and the resources. Like, the problem is, right, when you go to Korea, theirs is like if the most skilled guy also had the work ethic of the guy who had no skills. Like, you can't beat that. Like, that's why they're just OP as fuck. Like, because I've always told people this story because I feel like people still don't really get it. The best example ever, right, is the old school team, Azubu Frost, right? Mad Life, Woong, all these guys. Because what people don't understand about that team is something like 4 or 5 months into the player Shy, not the Shy, the original Shy in Korea, joining that team, he was effectively the best laner in the team. Like, they had Mad Life, who was a sick player, but the laners actually weren't that sick in that team. They used to be like a strategical squad.
Woong was a meme.
Even though this guy effectively was the best top laner in the whole world, on his team, he was bottom of the social totem because he was the youngest player and he had just joined the team. Like, you can imagine how different that changes people's mentality on who they are and where they need to get to. If even as technically the most skilled player today, I actually feel like I'm at the bottom of the top and I have to learn from these guys, or I have to help this guy improve, or maybe I don't even have the goal to say, I want to play the game this way. It's like they tell me how I'm going to play it. To me, that distinction is going to be so night and day compared to what Western players are like. Like, we're not even playing the same game effectively at this point.
Yeah, I think it's just tough, but I look forward to the emergence of some North American prodigy who's willing to go out to Korea and really hone their skills. Obviously, a little bit more challenging this year, but I think we've heard so many stories of like, Golden Glue's just out there, like Nemesis going out there right now and practicing up while he's not on a team. Like, I would love to see more of that kind of attitude.
Dude, I'm not one of these people who writes off Damonte. Like, I still like this guy's game. No problem I have is he's not on the right team. Like, there's a team, like, if you want to make a team, let's do like a thought experiment, right? So I make a team and I'm not allowed an import mid laner, so I have to take someone from NA, right? Damonte would be the first person I would take. And I would just then build the team to be something like, I know in theory you might say they tried to do this under Thieves. I would make it like it's going to have to play through like a fucking monster top lane or a god tier bot lane. Like, the problem in their team was, like, I still think the biggest problem in 100 Thieves has fuck all to do with the mid laners, aside from the fact the Yoma is bad. The biggest problem in their team is, on paper, they have two players that everyone thinks are straight fire, Closer and Someday. But together, in the same team right now, they aren't straight fire. So in my opinion, like, you don't even have the strengths to the team. Like, if I have a roster like that, they're supposed to be like my all-pro players. Like, well, those guys could cut. Like, mate, if you told me before the season starts, we have, in theory, maybe the best top laner and best jungler, we should be able to win League of Legends games.
FBI was also one of the best AD carries last year.
I was gonna say, like, before the split started, didn't on paper this look like the perfect team for Damonte? They had Someday, who had historically been like top 2. They had an FBI which in contention was maybe the best bot lane of the entire split. They were doing
at least
really
in
well.
The laning phase. They had very good stats last year,
which is good for Damonte's playstyle, the lane phase, right? So, and Closer, who was coming off a really good split, on paper, this looked like the team. Like, you couldn't get a more perfect setup for 100 Thieves with the players that you were given, right? So, how does it end up this way? Is, I guess, what we're all thinking, right? How could this possibly? Everyone thought that this was going to be the day, and Someday finally has teammates or something like that.
Well, what's weird too is the way that it fell apart in these playoffs, because it was based off of not an early game problem for the most part. It was based off of just complete ineptitude when it comes to mid-game shot calling and decision making, oftentimes with a lead. And so that's
the
what's
example
so
you were
confusing
given
to me.
before is even worse, actually, when you explain it further. Because I went and just looked at that moment in the game, right? It's the moment when, because you know another thing TSM just do this whole playoffs, and everyone else is just cool with this, is they just, apropos of nothing, just walk to the Baron. Just go, let's just go check out if the Baron's up. It's like, well, it is. No one's done it. But like, what's mad is that's half, Monty, of how they mind control motherfuckers and just hinting into them. Because there's a scenario in that 4th game where TSM's just walking up to the Baron with like 4 people. Closer is just soloing the dragon on his own and he's going to be fine finishing it, right?
Yep.
And all he, at this point, because he knows English, must be communicating to his team is just don't fight without me. So they then insist on having the shittest fight ever around those fucking like the Raptors or whatever it is. Like, it's just the most garbage fight ever. Like, it's one where it's like, dude, even if you like slightly win some of these fights, what do you really get from it? Like, aren't you still in a bad spot? Like won't both teams just be down 2 kills or something? Like, and they just throw the whole game off it. It's like, that's not even shot calling. That's anti-shot calling.
It's just these egregious plays too. Like the fact that they killed 2 members of TSM in game 4 by teleporting Orianna bot, and then TSM just 3-mans the Baron, and they don't even walk up to check the Baron or have any vision on it, even though they all just committed TP into the bot lane to get the kills. These things are, I mean, they're inexplicable in a lot of ways. Like they weren't pushing advantages when they had it. Like when they were a man up on the map,
all the
like
dragons,
they would
use
do
them,
the objective. And then when they didn't have the advantage that was given to them, they would just, into these fights. So the whole, like every layer of decision making from 100 Thieves was just so baffling throughout this series.
It's funny because I feel like this is like the 5th time we're saying how baffled we are that this even happened. Because people might
look, if you had showed me this game and I didn't know this was an LCS game, I would think this game was fixed, like legit. It looks like a team that's like, we're supposed to lose this game for the betting money, but oh my God, we're actually winning. Quick, how do we make sure the other team wins? It's like you do what they did.
Yeah, it's just funny because we're sitting here trying to give some like insight on how this could possibly happen, and every single time the point goes back to like they had what are they doing? It's like there's no other explanation for it other than like, my God, either 1, they suck, or 2, they were so nervous that they just lost all capacity to play the game and like what they would normally play. Because there is no way that this could happen like throughout the split and they'd end up in top 4. At least that's what you'd hope.
But here's the thing, Monty, I've got a tangent here, right? So a classic theme that comes up anytime you have episodes about LCS is everyone who follows the game on a high level, and especially if they watch regions like LPL, LCK, they always complain that the number one thing that the LCS teams are terrible at is basically like macro from the mid game onwards. Like they don't ever do it correctly. Half the time they don't Baron fight properly, they don't side lane properly. But this is the part that kills me, right? Is the reason why we can't just like dismiss that and be like, but it's okay for the top teams. Because when you look at how it filters down, this is what you end up with. You end up with what on paper is the 4th best team in LCS, can't, almost no matter what happens, win a series against the third best team, even if they're given the drafts and all the game scenarios from which to win. Like, there's something really disturbing about that. Because, you know, like in the past, some of those statements that LS made that were like super crazy to people, like when he said that like Rogue would beat TSM when Rogue was like, when they'd only just got the rookies in like 2 years ago, and they were sort of like, you know, the 7th or 8th best team, and TSM was like, you know, top 3. And the other classic one was when he said that like Jin Air, who was like one of the worst Korean teams, could have beaten G2 when G2 was like the best in the West and won MSI, right? Here's what people never understood about those scenarios. Listen, he obviously picked the most hyperbolic examples because he was trying to like make his point as extremely as possible. But the area where I even agreed he was right was, here's the difference. Jin Air, if you put them into certain macro situations, would actually play it out correctly and win that game. Rogue, actually, if you'd given them certain advantages to certain, like they had players like Larson, if you'd given them certain advantages, they'll just win that game. There's the difference. I give an LCS team who's even 4th versus number 3 a bunch of favorable scenarios, they can fuck it up. Like they can just mess it up so badly that they give all the advantages away. There's something wrong with the region itself. Like when that's like something's going on with like coaching, how people group think about the game.
True.
Like, something's really wrong.
Here's why that's not as egregious as it sounds. Because here's the thing historically about Jin Air. Jin Air, why I liked Jin Air, even when they were a bad team, was that they were bad individual players who were playing correct macro League of Legends. Was it boring to watch for many people and sometimes myself? Yes. Yes, it was. But were they playing extremely safe, conservative macro play? And were they actually like frustratingly good at that as a unit? Yes, they were, right? So in any case, even if you play like a complete pansy or have bad laners like they did, sometimes you could win games just by not being an idiot on the map and making sure your wards are in the proper locations, that you're playing around river choke points properly, which again has been a huge issue. Like the amount of face checking that goes on, not only in these games, but like in C9 versus TL as well, are just weird plays. This is going to come back and haunt teams against teams that know how to play in the river properly. Yeah, and I just haven't seen that this split consistently from any of the LCS teams. Do you think that's the one of the big problems, Allorim?
Well, I think in terms of macro game, you're right. Like NA has always been like a big step behind, and that's why, you know, there's always the NA RAM memes and all that, because a lot of the time you will see a game boil down to, you'll see all 5 members of the team clumping around mid lane, and whoever moves to the dragon first wins because they get the control, and the first person that face checks that bush dies, and then the next person will come in, or they'll just give it up entirely and say, okay, let's fight the next one, and then you'll see the same thing the exact same thing happen again. How often will you see a game in NA? Will you see a team give up everything and just lose the game? Other than the last series we just watched, where 100 Thieves beat TSM despite TSM giving up everything to 100 Thieves and still winning. That one, a little off on the side. But as for like the NA macro and how to fix it, I don't have the answer for that, because I think there's a lot of questions.
Hire the Jin Air coaches. Where are those guys?
Yeah. Like,
where are those guys?
How can we get the NA coaches to make people more disciplined? Because I think a lot of these bad situations come from the discipline. Like whether you are pushing one wave too much because you think, oh, maybe I can get away with it, or hey, let's just fight this 4v5 because we think they can be doing the Baron while Closer is soloing the Dragon. And these kind of things, I think you need one really loud leader on your team. And I think you guys were talking about the leaders before, right? Before the show started with me, you were talking about a leader on G2.
Yeah.
Whether you thought it was like absolutely necessary to have a winning team or not. I think for these int plays not to happen, you do need someone to just be on top of it at all times, where someone's just yelling you, fuck off, man, I'm doing this. Please, for fuck's sake, just stand still and wait for me to make the next choice. And you don't have a lot of that in NA, because in my experience on all the teams that I've been on is that a lot of the comms are very just individual, giving a suggestion and seeing how that goes. There's no one person
it's
kind
democracy,
of
right?
Yeah. And for these, and I think that's fine, but I do think there does need to be like one person to stop people from fucking around too much.
To be responsible. Yeah, exactly. Like you said, to be that, to rein you in or to say you can do something. Yeah, it makes sense.
Just have to have that decisive voice.
Because the reason I always hated it, if you try like pure democracy, listen, obviously everyone can contribute their ideas and give input to what they're individually doing. That goes without saying. But the reason I think it's whack personally when people are like, oh, we don't really have like shot callers in our team, is because it's like, that's a great way to just basically mean that no one gets the blame and we fuck all what we're talking about exactly now right up. Whereas the point is, I tell you what, if I have a team and it's some classical player that everyone thinks of as a shot caller, could be fucking High, Mithy, Afromu, well, at least I know who to go to if we're having massive problems, don't I? I can go to that guy and go, what the fuck are we doing? Like,
that's the issue.
I can start addressing it, can't I?
That's the issue. Like, if you're 100 Thieves, you know, everybody can be like, oh, well, we're just not going to do those stupid things next time. But unless somebody's actually responsible for making sure those stupid things don't happen, you can't fix the problem. Like, you have to actually sit down and be like, somebody needs to be the captain. You're going to be the captain. Dude, this is your problem.
How are LCS teams still running like school when I was a little kid and I was like 11 years old? And when you did something wrong, they send you to, I know for you guys, it's the principal. They call it like the, you know, I can't remember what you call it, head teacher in England, right? When you get sent along there, what happens? He says to you, because you're only like 11, you're not like getting fucking put in juvie. You've done something minor, right? So what he does, he essentially just shames you, right? He just goes, you know, and what did you do? And all you have to do is just say the words, don't you? You go, I messed up, you know, and he goes, and who have you let down? Yeah, and he goes, I've let down myself and the school and my class. And all he do at the end, like, that must be what the fucking, like, TSM VOD sessions are like. Like, yeah, oh, sorry, Reggie, yeah, and next time we won't make those mistakes. And, you know, and Hooney's like, and I'll stay on, you know, the lane and not in for no, like, what is this shit? Like, are they little kids? Like, we're not going to solve these problems doing that. Like, because that's the problem. I've always thought there's another problem that people have in League of Legends, especially. People have these sessions where they do the VOD review, and obviously in the VOD review, you all know what you did wrong. You're not playing the fucking game right now. You're watching it. But the point is, when you're in the game again, you're not going to be in the same frame of mind. So the problem solving that you did outside of the game isn't going to help you next time you're in that situation. It would be the equivalent. I know this is going to be a concept a lot you aren't going to be able to understand, unfortunately. But if you get it, you'll get it. It's the same premise as to why you could read all the books you want about talking to women. They ain't going to help you when you're actually talking to a woman, mate, because in that scenario, you can't go, wait a second, let me just, what page is that? Page 14. Like, you're in that moment, you have to just have it in your DNA, don't you? You've got to, like, imprinted it. So the problem I have is, like, I'm sure a lot of these coaches do their job. Like, they correctly say what was wrong, and we talk about what we're going to. The question is, how do we make it stick with these players? Because in my opinion, we've got to the root of one of the ways, which is you just have a super OG player who you can trust with this stuff, and you at least know there's one less problem in the server. Whereas one thing I do think is a problem in League of Legends now is getting players who today are pretty good on their champions in their role, but maybe have no understanding of how the game's played, or very little.
Yeah. I actually, when you're talking about this, I wonder, for 100 Thieves, who are you looking at when you're saying, man, this guy fucked? Are you looking at the players or the coach when you're seeing these problems?
I mean, I asked about this last week because I noticed no one ever brings up Six. This is someone who used to be hailed as one of like the best NA coaches. But I look at this team. First of all, this team looks way worse than Golden Guardians did, which was the same team with the worst roster. And secondly, part of that makes me speculate. Is it also coaching issues? Because they have a different coaching staff now, obviously. So I can't know, but I'd speculate.
I'd question the coaching as well, especially by putting Ryoma on the AD in the first two games. Was just very weird strat to me. And it's like, if you're going to take that approach, then I think if you're going to take the control mage approach, then take it. And if you're not going to take the control mage approach, maybe Damonte would be my argument. So I don't know, but I did see some things that were suspect. And also I just thought the fact that these players are throwing these leads is also not it does not shine a good light on the coaching staff. I'll put it that way, because I would think that these are solvable problems from a coaching perspective. Like, it can't be that hard to win a game with a lead. Like, this is a series where it felt like 100 Thieves would win all the games and they lost 3-1. How the fuck is that possible? How is that possible? All right, I'm tired of talking about this series. Let's talk about C9 versus TL for a bit before we get Dylan Falco on to talk about LEC and Schalke, because it was a good dive into some of these issues. But these are the teams that I thought C9 would win this series. I thought their victory was pretty convincing overall. I think a lot of people were saying, okay, Team Liquid, they've got the top gap with Alfari. Turns out Fudge was extremely competitive over the course of this series. He's a player who has grown, I think, substantially since the lock-in tournament. From your top lane expertise, how would you say that Fudge has improved as a player over the course of the split?
Well, I think everybody at the start thought Fudge was not so great, right? But, and even I think I put Fudge at 8th in the tier list in the middle of the split, because from what I saw from Fudge, and I also took a little bit of my own experience because I've laned versus many of these players, right, in LCS or Academy. And so I took that and I compared it to the other players, and I thought, okay, C9 has been sticking Fudge on. When I did that tier list, he had played 4 games of Gragas in a row and a Karma game. And so it's just, okay, maybe for me, I just couldn't tell how good Fudge was because he was playing this weak side so often. But the thing is, when he was playing that weak side, he didn't really get that much jungle proximity either, and he had the lowest deaths in the league. And while stats don't mean everything, I do think that speaks a lot to someone who is playing with a team that acknowledges that they're usually not going to be playing around him. And the fact that he's not dying at all and just doing his role is probably the best thing he could have done for C9 at the time. That being said, against the series against TL, everybody thought it was just going to be an Alphari gap, right? It was just going to be an absolute stomp. But Fudge coming from that kind of weak side player to coming into the series and putting up a very good fight against Alphari and even getting ahead in some of the matchups, like it speaks volumes of how good a player can get from playing on the best team. I think Fudge already was a talented player, and he's young and he has a long future ahead of him in terms of his career. But I think you could put a lot of top laners in Fudge's position, and the fact that he's surrounded by some of the best players in the region and some of the best players coming from other regions, it is just a spot. That's the real hyperbolic time chamber. Is you get so much better so fast that people forget about how okay you were before, and you just become one of the best top laners in the entire region.
I think there's several things, because I actually did watch a lot of Fudge's and Cloud9 Academy's games last year, and I could tell from those games that he was better than he was performing in the lock-in tournament. Right. So my conclusion was either he had fallen off, which I thought was unlikely knowing him, and his kind of dedication to practice, or that he was just integrating into this new roster and maybe nervous about participating in the LCS and would improve over time, which I thought was probably the more likely option, because I had seen, pretty good skill on this guy overall, even in Academy. And I think that, the other factor too is that not only are there these excellent players surrounding him, like you're talking about, and certainly having a leader helping you shot call like Perks on the team is absolutely enormous, but also one thing that is kind of flown under the radar has been that Cloud9 really invested in positional coaches this year.
One of the biggest coaching staffs in the entire West, as far as I know.
Veigar V2, Max Waldo, Mithy, and then Rainover now as the head coach. But from the conversations that I've had and what I've heard said has been that they have focused a lot, their positional coaches, on helping his laning phase, which has been a continuous source of improvement. So I think you can see the value of having some of these high-level players who may not be good enough to go pro, but are good enough to kind of understand the micro of a laning phase and be able to kind of do the research at a high level and then help the player directly with that without taking away the head coach's
just look how fucking experienced your supportive positions are as well. Rainover and Mithy, your fucking jungle and support positional coach. Like, enough said.
Well, it seems like they have one for every lane, right? And so when you are that kind of new player coming into the LCS, and I'm assuming that how it would work is after every single game, you're having like a little one-on-one with your positional coach. How could your improvement not be like dramatic, right? Every single lane phase you're being told about, because they get to see the game on a wider screen, right, with no fog and everything. So it will become ingrained to you after every game. They speak to you about the matchup and talk to you about the waves and everything like that, that eventually it will just become second nature to you. And that's just one of the biggest reasons why you can go from.
I mean, not only that, but these guys are there watching you play solo queue and then going and digging around in a bunch of OPGG replays of some of the best top laners in the world to research specific matchups. And then they just come back to you with the information.
Well, and
that sounds great.
One big thing I want to talk about is like, these are players who are, GM or challenger players themselves of these coaches. And I think that is the future of coaching around the entire world, is going to be maybe not retired players per se, but players who or League of Legends players who have been challenger or GM. I think that could be debatable because you could be a lower ranked player and still know a lot about the game macro wise. But when it comes to positional coaching like that, I feel like the future of League of Legends will that a lot of these teams will have positional coaches in each lane.
I agree.
Yeah, that are always also challenger.
I mean, I'm the example of the opposite, right? Where, there's two approaches you can do. I took the kind of film study approach and prioritizing my knowledge on team comps and the macro game. But I will be the first to tell you at all phases of my career that I was not an expert on a lot of, nuances of lane matchups, right? I would take the information that was given to me by the pros or the information I'd gained from watching a lot of games, right? But for the most part, we didn't have ProView back in the day when I was coaching. So my ability to, or even replays. So my ability to do that research was limited. But I agree now that I think there's a whole new separate class of coaching that can be opened up for the ex-pro players, or at least like Masters Plus players that may not have the mechanics, but at least have the knowledge and ability to do this research to complement, coaches that are very familiar with the overall macro game. Or like researching kind of tendencies of a specific opponent when it comes to compositions, strength of play. But I think it's cool to see that Cloud9 really pushing the envelope of what you can do when it comes to those kind of positional coaches and having different kinds of coaches on the staff overall, right? Because I think it's great. And also, I mean, it helps that you kind of have Perks in the server who basically is a coach in the game with you. He reminds me, we were talking about the NFL, Thorin and I, before we started this podcast. He reminds me of Peyton Manning in a lot of ways, where why it was unfair to play against Peyton Manning was that he was like an offensive coordinator on the field, right? Calling the shots. And he could change things at the last second, which an offensive coordinator can't do. So for me, Perks just has this awareness, and not only that, but he has the attitude to like boost his teammates up. This is why he is so unique and incredibly valuable. So you combine these factors together.
We can just tie this into the conversation earlier. Like we were talking about like the macro problems, right? Well, look at the two teams that we're left with realistically, who are the best two in NA, right? Cloud9 has Perks, who basically is probably the best player ever for that, maybe being like both like a good player in the game and like a calling presence. Then you add in who's his rival team. It's where CoreJJ has just been doing the same shit for the last like 3 years at this point. So like those players, it's not just like they can be MVPs in their role. They're actually way more important for the other shit. Like their role as a captain is like worth its weight in gold. Just look how good their teams get when they play.
Yeah, and if played with someone like Arrow when I was on Optic, Arrow was really big about that too. Is that if by chance, if our coaches miss something, you can always expect someone like Arrow to pick up on it during the review, which is what I'd assume with Perks and CoreJJ too. They can be talking about something, and let's say the coaching staff misses an important point. They will be the ones to bring that up and get the conversation going. So it's always good to have that kind of analytical player on the team that just also happens to be the best in their role, which is a nice thing to have.
You know why that is, though?
Why?
It's actually obvious, because it's quite common practice to use an arrow to point to some information that you'd like people to check out. Video games, there you go. Straight fire. Whatever, keep going.
Yeah,
it was a real point, believe it or not.
And having that makes review much more productive, because like, let's say you don't have all the points that maybe you miss some things. Like, no, more often than not, you will be spending too much time on a single point, and God knows that sometimes review in North America can go on and on and on, and too long of a review weighs heavy on a player.
Oh yeah, your eyes just glaze over. After
you're like just ready for it to end. But when you have someone who can kind of be a voice too and say, okay, next point, and get onto an equally similar, like a more important point or another problem that the team could fix, I think that's a really big help. And that's why having such a good staff, like for C9 example, they have so many people that can be bringing out these points that can even dish them out, and probably pretty quickly. They don't have to spend 15-20 minutes on each point. They can bang them out and then go on to the next game.
Or you just don't bring up those individual laning points with the entire group, and you just break off afterwards and work with those players individually, as opposed to wasting everybody's time, which is very common in these VOD reviews, where it's like, let's talk about the top lane matchup, and everybody else is like,
Yeah, well, the worst, I can tell you, the worst is like, let's say you fucked up something mechanically, and your coach goes, but you shouldn't have done this here. But like, no shit. You spend like the next 10 minutes going over, maybe I should have eat here when you should have queued, or you should have lasted. It's awful when that becomes the case. And I have no doubt that still happens sometimes, but I'm hoping that kind of coaching will go away entirely and in favor of these branching off to positional coaching kind of style later.
So let's talk about this series in particular, because I don't think anybody was wow. Like it was okay. Like it was a pretty good series overall, but I don't think anybody was really wowed by the level that either of these teams have shown. That said, you and I and Thorin were talking during the break and saying like, well, I said the thing that I appreciate about C9 and Team Liquid is like, they don't have the best practice opponents here, but they're players on an individual level. Whoever goes to MSI, I'm confident that with better practice for a little bit, they will actually improve and be competitive. Whereas, I don't think TSM or, 100 Thieves would be able to show that. It's just the individual talent on these teams is high. So I'm not so worried about that, once they go over to Iceland. But one thing that was very weird about this series, and I'm curious if you have any insight on it, was the Sylas blind picking and Sylas priority that developed here, which seems like, sometimes in a best of 5, you get into like a weird meta between two teams. And it just felt like we were like in this very strange, like Sylas rabbit hole that I didn't really understand why this was happening or what the purpose of doing it was.
I think a lot of the times, at least in my experience with Sylas blind picking, it just entirely depends on the enemy comp. You can see a whole bunch of ults that you want on Sylas, and then so it's like, all right, give me the champion I can play into any matchup. So maybe that was the logic.
Sure. I mean, at least in game 2, when C9 was on red side, when you see Hecarim, Seraphine, Gangplank, you're feeling pretty good about Sylas.
Yeah,
right?
So
you're feeling pretty good.
Sylas already is like a good champion, and I'm not too familiar with his matchups in mid lane, only kind of top lane. But I know mid laners I played with previously, they'll see certain ultimates, like they'll see an Alistar on the enemy team. It's like, give me Sylas, because the Alistar ult is just so good, right? And I think a lot of, not that it happened that series, but it'll be the same. Like if you see a Malphite ultimate, it's like, oh my god, give me Sylas no matter what.
So even in this series though, like the actual first game, I actually found the other side of that what's quite weird. I don't claim to be like a draft expert, but when I was watching that, I was like, why the fuck would he pick the Ahri into the Sylas? Like, isn't that Sylas then just a better version of Ahri? Like, at this moment, at the moment, if people don't know at the moment, right, Ahri is basically like a skill matchup pick that people are picking because they think specifically they like know a matchup slightly better. So if you're doing that, you're already sort of trying like ice skate uphill if you're Jensen. So like to me, he just started the series off as hard as possible, as far as I can tell. Like, I don't know why, because it's already a series where he was under a lot of pressure.
I find Ahri kind of suspect and niche right now, because I understand, the Everfrost strength on it and being able to reposition very quickly to get like big roots and make sure you land your charm. But I just don't see how Ahri does anything into the C9 composition. Like, you're never going to get an angle to engage on anyone that you would actually want to in this game, right? Like there's no way that Everfrost route is coming down on a valuable target.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they thought like it worked once, maybe it'll work again. I agree. I kind of think Ahri is a bad champion. Like fundamentally, the only reason Ahri is played is because Everfrost exists, right?
She is bad.
And so like, couldn't you just have done that with someone else, build Everfrost on like another character and just be a better version of Ahri? Potentially, right?
Could have also run Seraphine mid lane, right?
Yeah.
So she is essentially just an Everfrost delivery mechanism. That's all that Ahri actually is.
And it's so weird to think that would become like a not a priority pick, but like, oh yeah, let's pick Ahri, when it's just you saying, okay, yeah, let's pick mobility over Everfrost.
On the other side of that, in terms of weird Everfrost champs, one thing that did develop in this series too was Everfrost Nidalee in the jungle for Blabber, and I actually really like that, because if you if you get the chunk damage out with a spear, you can immediately leap in and then root the target to create a pick, which I thought was interesting and creative way to add potential additional engage to the team.
I wouldn't call it engage as much as it is like Everfrost is. Everfrost was just a good item, right? Like it's another ability on your champion, really. And it's what it feels like when I play against it. It's like it denies so much opportunity because it has that kind of delay mechanism where it kind of comes out and you can still run into it. It's not an instant thing. And so because of that, it just adds an extra ability to your character that is just straight up either a massive slow or a root. And so I don't even think it's that good on Nidalee as much as it is what's better on Nidalee. Like you could build Leandries or Ludens or Moonstone.
I mean, I think it is good on Nidalee, though. That's the thing, is that, you know, if you're running Nidalee and you're trying, like, the problem with running poke comps or with running Nidalee is following up on the damage that you have, right? But this instantly solves that problem in a way.
Yeah.
It makes your picks much more reliable.
I guess so, but usually when you're doing like these kind of long range picks with Nidalee, it's because of a setup from another champion. And like, at least when I'm playing the game and I'm playing against Nidalee's, I'm never like, unless I'm already on, Nidalee's already on top of me, the Everfrost obviously is not doing. That's why I feel kind of weird when people build Everfrost on Zoe, because many of the times when Zoe is doing things to me, it's like from a pretty long range. And like, if I'm getting hit by Zoe E, like then that's me getting fucked up and getting hit by the E. Same with Nidalee. Nidalee wouldn't have the opportunity to use Everfrost in me.
All right. So you're just saying just dodge the skill shots, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, because what you think when I think Everfrost is like more a CC into an extra CC or something that you're already lower range. I guess in my head it's that these champions have more of like long range utility. And that Everfrost just happens to be that good, or Everfrost just happens to be that much better than Ludens and Leandries.
All right, so let's end with you because we have to get on to Dylan. He's been waiting, but let's talk about kind of the next phase of these playoffs. We see Cloud9 going directly to the finals. Team Liquid's going to have to play 2 games potentially, or TSM's going to have to play 2 games. I say, you know, it seems very unlikely that TSM is going to win given their performance and the fact that they've already lost to Liquid. And Liquid looked better against C9 than they did against TSM. So do you think Liquid's capable of pulling this out now that we've kind of seen this top lane matchup that was supposed to be TL's advantage? Because to me, it seems like
it means win the whole LCS, not TSM. Win LCS.
Actually, you know, I'm a little worried for TL because I think Tactical, and I think we can all agree, like Tactical has not looked as good as he has before. And I think that's a big problem. Well, let's say you beat TSM and now you're coming against Sven Vulcan, who, my God, Vulcan has been on fire the entire split. And I feel like Tactical's biggest problem has been getting caught out. And I think Vulcan's the best thing about him is finding the engages when someone is out of position. And so, and with Alfari kind of underperforming recently, I think, you know, that being one of the main ways how they got ahead, they haven't really gotten that far ahead on bot lane ever since the lock-in tournament when Tactical Core JJ were doing all the 2v2 kills. I think TL are going to struggle even against TSM if that kind of play comes up, because let's say TSM all of a sudden starts drafting properly and, you know, they can actually get dragons in the early game. You know, it's so funny to talk about this because all I can talk about is how is this team going to fuck up for the other team to get ahead, right?
This is the problem with doing analysis, like being a color commentator, and it always has been in NA, by the way. You can't analyze the game because you, as a color caster, look like a fucking idiot because the teams always mess up what you're supposed to do. So it makes you look bad. If you're casting the game, you're like, well, I don't know why they did that, right?
Because I'm trying to think. Because I just realized, I stopped myself in my rant because I realized I wasn't talking about what good is going to come for the team to get them ahead. I'm thinking about how is X team going to fuck up and get the other team ahead. So,
and to TSM's credit, they were very good at getting those Barons, you know, once the throw occurred, right?
And C9 seemed to have the least fuck ups, right? So that's why I think it'll be really hard for teams at TSM and TL while they just fuck this up. So maybe, you know, they won't be the best.
Jesus. All right. Well, sounds like C9 is the early favorite here, given what we've already seen, but we'll have to wait till next weekend. I think it's going to be really hard for any team to go to in those back-to-back best of fives and beat C9, right?
Agreed.
It's doing both of those games in the same weekend is pretty rough on the teams that are in the losers bracket for sure. Okay, well, thank you, Allorim, for coming on the show again. Really appreciate it. Are you going to be broadcasting this next week for either the losers or the winners finals?
I'm not broadcasting anymore because I'm still busy with Proving Grounds. So
that's fair.
So I will be competing in that, and our next match is against C9 Academy in 2 days, or tomorrow actually.
Tomorrow. Okay. Well, good luck. Good luck. Hope you've got some practice in for the rest of the day, and we'll wait and see how these LCS playoffs go. We've got to take a quick break, guys, to get Dylan on the show, in which case we'll talk about LEC and Schalke's very good performance over these playoffs. Thanks for joining us, Allorim. We'll see you guys in a few minutes. All right, it's time for the LEC segment. Dylan Falco, the coach of Schalke since 2018, and we are being very graciously joined by you because you guys unfortunately did lose to Rogue yesterday. So I appreciate it, even after coming off that loss. But you guys did have a really good playoff performance overall. So let's start with kind of the beginning of this year. You guys had some big roster changes, obviously, losing a potential star player, an upset, and then having to make some adjustments. So what was your thought process on the roster coming into this year, and how are you trying to, fix some big name players leaving the team?
So yeah, we lost Odo Omne. I think
Yep.
probably our biggest loss. He went to
Yep.
Rogue in the off season.
Yep.
But at least we kind of had something to build on. With the whole Miracle run last summer, we won, I think, 10 or 11 games in a row against all of pretty much swept the whole LEC. So the plan going into this year was mainly to try and keep the core of what we can keep and feel was strong from this and kind of build on top of that. And my vision was to try and get the best mechanical skilled, like high skilled mechanical players to fill the last two positions. And with that, we ended up with BrokenBlade and Limit as our two additions. So I think with BrokenBlade, it was really good because he had already played with Abba before. They played on Royal Bandits back in Turkey, where they like almost won the championship. So they had a lot of synergy together. They really, really wanted to play with each other. And as for Limit, I think it was very clear to me when watching SK last year that I thought that he was their best player. And I thought that he was a lot of the reason why the Limit Crown Shot lane got so much praise, being actually one of the better performing lanes in the LEC. So yeah, that's sort of why we brought on Limit.
I actually heard something similar, by the way, behind the scenes from some of the coaches and players. Like, basically, in the off-season when Crownshot didn't get picked up, even though I think out of 10 teams, he's certainly like an LEC level player. Yeah. I know that I think like the difference is fans looked at last year, and because out of the carries, he was the main one in SK. They were like, he's one of the best players in the whole LEC. And it's like, I actually heard a lot of coaches and players also thought that like actually having Limit, it was what the difference maker was for Crownshot, the way he looked like his absolute best.
But it could actually be hard sometimes when it comes to bot lane, especially when you're scouting for your teams and building rosters, to try and figure out like who's actually carrying the bot lane. Or the other way, if a bot lane is doing really, really bad, who is actually the problem? Because sometimes you can have someone who's a very skilled AD or very skilled support, but if their lane partner is just too bad, they're just going to keep losing against LEC level players. So yeah, it can be kind of interesting for sure.
Limit also, I think, what was surprising to me was having such a breakout performance over the course of these playoffs, where he was really, probably I think many of your players played well. Abadage also, I think, had a very strong playoff performance, but Limit in particular was so phenomenal on some of the roams and engages, looked super comfortable on both the Gragas and especially the Alistair. So did you see like a difference in his level between the regular season and coming in, or is he a player who's kind of blossomed under this playoff pressure?
I think you never really know how players will play under that sort of pressure until they're there. So I'm happy he performed. I think also we developed kind of a play style that really played towards his strengths. Like very engage heavy team compositions, a lot of like really easy follow up on engages, like first G2, for example, the Orianna Alistar combos. Like it's a very set play that we can go for in practice and drill over and over again. And then when it comes to it in stage, as long as he can find the moments, we can then win the fights.
What would you say about the development of Abadage? Because he's a player where, if people don't remember the story, he came in with that class that was him, Nemesis,
Yeah.
and Humanoid. And obviously, like, Nemesis isn't even in the league anymore. Humanoid, like, in theory, is one of the better teams, sure, but even he had his, like, circuitous route. Of the three, people basically, before that miracle run last year, they'd written off Abadage completely. They thought he was a bust. Like, he just hadn't made it. It's the same story over and over again. Oh, he's really good in scrims, but not in the actual. Normally that story, if you hear that trend, like, those players often don't make it. It must be very satisfying to stick with the player after all these splits, and he's actually in the last couple of splits really come into basically like delivering the promise of what he had, right?
So I feel like, first of all, I'm like really happy that we stuck with Felix or Abba for all these years, right? This is the third year he's playing on Schalke. It's been really clear in both last split and this split that he deserves to be on one of the top teams. Absolutely. Seems like undeniable from his performance. I do think though sometimes he kind of got retconned a bit into being a bad player in his first year. When he joins the league, we go 7-2, first place, tied with G2, and then the whole team has a breakdown. And there, I think for sure, Abba had a lot of very poor games in the back half of that split, where we went from like tied for first place or second place to not making playoffs, which was a bit of a disaster. But his second split, he ended third place in the LEC. And to me, coming in as a rookie mid laner and finishing third place, showing a lot of good performances in that playoffs where he carried games versus Rogues and he carried games versus, I think it was Vitality, the other one. And I don't see that as like being someone who like choked in their rookie year or didn't make it. I think what people remember from that year is the final set for Worlds, where I think he had a pretty bad set against Humanoid. And you kind of like, I feel like it works this way sometimes in esports, where if the very last best of 5 you played, you had a really bad set, like the whole year gets kind of retconned into being like, oh, such a bad year. He really didn't work out as a
Oh, for
rookie with his
sure.
third
Yeah,
place finish behind G2 and Fnatic in his rookie year. Like I
sure.
I don't know. Obviously, he improved a lot. Like that much is completely certain. But I do feel like he was always one of like a huge talent and one of the better mid laners in the LEC. And maybe just like one or two really key best of fives kind of ruined his rep a bit, maybe among some of like the casters. I know among a lot of like the players in the LEC, they always thought he was really good or good at least.
Fair enough.
Sure, but the casters are going off of the games that they can see, right?
Yeah, of
Whereas
course,
the players and you get to see all of the scrim games. You get to have a deeper understanding of his solo queue performance. Do you think that at least for a while there was a time when he was better in scrims? Like, not to say that he was bad on stage, because you're trying
He
to
looked a
clarify
bit
that
tentative
point.
sometimes in the stage
Yeah.
games as well, Dylan.
Oh,
Like, it's
for
not
sure,
like we're
like-
just talking about bad form. He sometimes looked like he was a little bit shook in the matches, you know?
Yeah, of course. Like his very first split, there's games where he was like diving under turret and not flashing and dying without using flash and all this sort of stuff. Absolutely. But I don't think that was like the whole split or the whole year for.
Fair
But
enough.
yeah, of course these games did happen.
No, listen, I'll actually give you that one. Like, people probably have like written off that year too much because people unfortunately only remember in that team like wasn't upset good and everyone else sucked. It's like they can't all have sucked. Come on, like as you say, you finished third, you just didn't go to Worlds basically.
I just don't think you go third place in the LEC with bad mid laner. Like that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, that's fair comment.
Well, we were talking about that to start off the show. Is that what does it mean to have like Niski on Fnatic right now? And I do want to kick off the conversation with that, because you're in a unique position where I want to talk later about how you prepared for two different opponents that are so wildly different in terms of style in the same weekend, because that seems quite challenging. But to start off, you were also a coach on Fnatic. So what has your read over the last few years on the changes that Fnatic has made, and then your preparation as Schalke going into this Fnatic roster this weekend?
Okay, so Fnatic is like a very, very special team to work with and a very special team to be a part of. They've been one of the only teams I think that have been outspoken about their internal issues throughout the years. And I think that is very different. I think there are a lot of teams that struggle with like internal issues or drama or players not getting along with each other.
Sometimes even the ones that win, if people don't know, it can be a very successful team and you can have a nightmare time, of course. Yeah.
Well, I was on this team for like almost 2 years. And we won championships, right? And it wasn't always like the nicest team environment to be in. I think overall like it was pretty good and positive, and we tried really, really hard, which at the end of the day I think is the most important part. But yeah, it can be a really stressful team to be on, especially some of the rosters in the last couple of years, some very difficult personalities. I think when this roster was announced this year, um, it just everybody kind of knew that this is a very, very explosive lineup as far as personalities is concerned, but also like very, very talented. I'd say.
Sure, and it's also you've seen kind of players go both ways, right? Like you have players that you've coached now go back and be on Fnatic as well. So what was your preparation like? Because it seems you have the intimate knowledge of the org and the way that some of these players play, but you also have intimate knowledge of individual players on the Fnatic roster. So what was your approach to prepping the team for Schalke this weekend, and how did you devise your strategy around your knowledge?
So prepping for Fnatic is like probably like the most one-dimensional team I've ever had to prepare for by watching their scrims against us and watching their games. Like usually you prep for teams individually, but usually it's like you're still just trying to draft a good team comp and you're trying to play good League of Legends. But from reviewing our scrims against them in the previous weeks and reviewing their games, it was pretty much the same thing every game. They were just camping bot on every single slow push. Their jungler would be bot, no matter what. Their jungler would be trapping in bushes or on every single slow push, and they would just camp bot over and over and over again. And then mid game, all they would do is just try and fight mid over and over again. They would just run mid S5 and try and engage. They would draft champs that snowball very heavily. They would generally draft champs that allowed upset to carry the game if you got really fed. And that was like literally their two plays was camp bot on slow pushes and then engage mid 5-man. So the most important things for us were to just have champs that are good in the fights. Like I know it sounds kind of basic, but like just I didn't want weak champions. I wanted strong junglers like Udyr, for example, or Volibear, where if they're trying to make these 3v3 happens or they're camping bot that we can just win. And then just drill my team over and over again about just not dying to these 5-man plays mid, because it's actually unbelievable like how often this was all they would do.
I mean, you make it sound so easy. So
Oh, like it can go the other way too. Like I thought going to this day that one of these teams is getting 3-0'd. Either we're getting 3-0'd or they're getting 3-0'd, and I was happy that we're on the good end of it. But I think this team, like Fnatic, if they're having a good day and Selfmade is playing well and Upset is playing well, I think for sure like they can have pop-off series.
The thing is, what you're saying there, though, that's like an example of one thing I hate about League of Legends is there's a lot of analysis that actually has like a depth to it, but because people themselves don't understand the depth, they don't engage. Like a classic example, right? Everyone knows this meme. You'll remember it was from just before you were a coach, was when Skara went on the LCS and he said that famous line where he was like, it's like Dignitas is winning until they lose. And everyone went, ha ha ha, what an idiot. Of course they were. And I always thought like, what? That doesn't even make sense. Like every team that loses the game wasn't winning until they were losing. Like his point there was actually quite a shrewd one. It was about teams that accrue advantages and are in winning positions, but then throw the game. And every fan just took it as like, well, until you lose, of course you win. It's like they missed the point completely because they couldn't engage. So similarly, when you say that, like you just want to pick strong champions that could either fight in a 3v3 skirmish or in the 5v5 team fight, that's actually pretty notable if you're the coach of the team that on paper is supposed to have weaker players than G2, Fnatic, etc. These are teams that on like you said about the player talent, they're supposed to thrash your team. You're not supposed to be able to win. Yeah. So you're not going to just coach only your style against them. You're going to look what short circuits them, right? What gives us a chance to even it up?
For example.
Yes.
Like for G2, for example, it was a different approach. So I think it ended up working out pretty well. And yeah, I also think that Fnatic,
how would you contrast the two then? How do you do something different against G2 that you contrasted to what you did against Fnatic?
Like versus G2, I think it was very different. It was very clear that their bot lane played a lot more like non-interactive, I would say. Like it's reckless, right? Like he's gonna farm, he's gonna see us very well, he's gonna play very, very safe, and he will probably be ahead if he gets what he wants mid-late game. I think he was playing a lot of champs such as Kai'Sa, but you also need to be aware of his Tristana, like famous Tristana, and all these sort of hyper carries, and that's kind of the look for them. Versus G2, at least for me, it was a lot more about just punishing their top side and punishing like specific blind picks that Wonder had, for example. Like we had the Darius prep for Sion. So it's not as much about like being able to fight this bot 3v3 and survive and like win the fights and then go mid and ARAM. It's more like, can we just counterpick top really heavily? Can we exploit the fact that they're playing 2 to 3 tanks in every single team comp? Like we had Darius Azir, for example. So it was a bit different of an approach.
Yeah, I do want to talk a bit more about your drafts in the Fnatic series, but I think we should go back and talk about the G2 series because we had a long conversation about this last week. And part of what I've been really enjoying about having you on the broadcast is that you're willing to go in like in critical games and do those like interviews at the start of the game, which I find very fun, and also provide a great perspective. And one of the things we discussed last week is that it's not a knock on you, but it's just that everyone got kind of the scaling read wrong in game 5. So it was, you were like, I think it was logical. I was agreeing with you when I was watching the broadcast. Oh yeah, I think it makes sense that Schalke has the better scaling composition. That's what you said in this interview. Then we have the casters being like, oh shit, we have to reevaluate kind of our assumptions about what this comp is doing on the side of G2. So were you kind of surprised watching that game and seeing how unkillable this composition ended up becoming with this Seraphine and caps on the Lucian in the middle of it? Like, how was your experience in the back kind of watching this game play out? Because I can't imagine it was fun, but it must have been quite shocking, right?
Yeah, of course. All the players thought we were outscale. Like the calls were like, okay, we're gonna wait here for a Jinx IE. We got Baron. I think they killed like a tier 2 or something. We pushed out the waves. We got like 4K gold lead or 3K gold lead, whatever it was. And it was just like, okay, now we're gonna sit here, we're gonna farm, we're gonna wait for a Jinx IE spike, and then we're gonna just like fight for the next objectives and try and win. But yeah, the caster's wrong, I was wrong, team was wrong.
Everybody was wrong.
Everybody kind of like blamed the itemization, but to be honest, I
No.
don't think it would have
No.
made a difference.
I
feel
literally,
like,
we were talking about like that Reddit post, which I thought was really good last week about kind of doing the differences between like actually, Ludens and versus Leandries. And also, I didn't even know before that post that there's some kind of like weird interaction with Azir where Ludens actually like procs more frequently because the cooldown gets reduced by the number of sand soldiers hitting as each an individual spell, which I had no idea, right?
Yeah, so what happened with Azir was Azir got 10 damage off of every single auto from his soldiers, the patch before the Ludens changes. And Azir, like, if you just look like data-wise, his win rate in solo queue dropped from like 48 to 43 or something, or 44. It was a huge nerf. All the European mids immediately dropped Azir on that patch. A much weaker. But this Ludens interaction, where every single soldier hit pumps up your Ludens to proc again, actually made Azir see a lot more play again, but it was like because of the build Azir saw play. So if people are playing Azir again because of the build, it's really hard in that moment to like change your item. And I'm not even sure it would have been better.
It
would have been
wouldn't
better
it wouldn't have been
Sion
better
for sure. But yeah.
I mean, we look like after looking at those numbers, the difference would have been negligible. And this, let me put it this way: this wasn't a game of inches at the end.
No.
It wasn't like, oh, if this item had been different, because realistically, if you go back and watch those team fights, G2 never comes close to dying at any point in time, like not anywhere close. Like there wasn't a way via items that this team fight was going to be won. So do you now in retrospect, having kind of broken this down with the team, do you think that what was your takeaway? What was your learning from this? Do you think you should have played the team fights differently? Do you think there was a way for you guys to win like a straight up 5v5? I'm curious what your review was, and if you would have changed anything, what would it have been?
So we looked at it, and it was a lot different than the like the Twitter and Reddit analysis are all talking about like items and drafts. And, it's OP. It's actually really different. For us, it was a few key moments. One, when we aced them 5-man mid, we sent something which is pretty common. We sent Jinx to get resources on the map while we killed the Baron. But what ended up happening in that moment is we took so long to do the Baron that G2 actually come out from base and they create like dead waves on mid because they end up clearing the mid wave before us, and it really like slows down the game and our ability to take mid tier 1 turret. So like it was kind of we misplayed this moment after we aced them. Everyone's kind of freaking out a bit. Probably should have just instantly taken Nash with 5 people and then played the game really, really fast and tried to kill as many objectives as possible because we were way stronger at that point, right? We're gonna win the fights. So I think it was a lot of like how we managed our tempo in the game, and how we use that advantage and what to do. Also, I think Jinx gets caught out at some point later in that game and blows both her sums, and then we actually have to wait for Jinx sums for like 5 minutes, which also was really good, really bad for us. It was like kind of like these sort of more minute things, macro stuff.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Did you, as a follow up in this series, not to undermine your performance, but it did feel as though G2 was taking their foot off the gas and maybe doing some weird picks in game 3 that gave you kind of a window back into this game. Did you feel disrespected by that draft at all coming into game 3?
I think it would have been really funny if they didn't ban a ban because their players don't want to ban, and then we end up winning the series in a reverse sweep. That would have been a pretty nice one for sure.
Pretty well would have been for sure.
That's not
I
something
thought
that
you
would
guys were going to pull it off. Like I really
Yeah,
thought you were going to win that game.
I really thought we
5.
would too, yeah. But that's not something that would happen on one of my teams, I would say. But yeah, of course, like they're literally not banning a champ, and their players are saying in the comments. I think they released it. They're like, no, don't ban that. No, don't ban that. So they just ban nothing, you know. So yeah, of course. But I also I think you see from the Mad Lions that I don't think G2 are in top peak G2 form right now. So
Yeah, very true, very true. Which makes their disrespect even more kind of questionable, right? Because they don't have the same
yeah,
leeway.
it's kind
What
of
do you
it's another
think?
thing, I guess.
Like, obviously, the thing everyone wants to do, but I noticed no one really seems to have successfully done it in a meaningful way, is contrast this G2 to the Perks G2, right? And see how are they different, blah, blah, blah. Like, I've noticed if you watch during the split, even, like, the individual players obviously still had very high game knowledge. Like, some of their understanding of, like, what to do with the waves seems like they're still some of the best in the entire league. But, like, clearly there is something different, though. So, how would you contrast this team to the one that had Perks? Like, how is it, is there a way where they can be an even better team in some other way with Reckless? They weren't with Perks. What do you think they've lost from not having Perks?
I think they play a bit slower in general. A lot more scaling stuff, I would say, at least in playoffs. I think as long as you have Reckless on the team, that's kind of going to be
Makes sense to play to his strengths.
thing
Yeah,
that's going to happen, and it plays to their strengths. And I think they won a lot of regular season games with Reckless playing
for
kind of
sure.
like his classic late game hyper carry and getting ahead. And I think even in playoffs, there's even like their last game in playoffs that they lost, Reckless is so strong in the game. He still has this ability to just be ahead of the curve of the game, which is really good. I think that Wonder's just having not good as a split as he has in the past, so that is probably a big difference with Perks, just like on an individual basis, not like a playstyle basis. The main playstyle thing, I guess, would be, yeah, kind of what I said, just play a bit slower, a bit more around Reckless than the Perks one, which was a bit more explosive and a bit more fight heavy.
So heading into the second round with Fnatic now, going back to some of the drafts that you saw, because your theory about the way that Fnatic was playing does seem to kind of be supported by these drafts, because I was quite confused by their first game when it seemed like, okay, so they have Twisted Fate, but they can really, they're like all inning on bot lane, because
Yeah.
why would you be sending TF top with Lulu? Right. So I feel like from what you're saying, it's these drafts made their game plan even more transparent.
Yeah.
It was so telegraphed, right?
Yeah, no, of course. It's like it was so unbelievably clear exactly what was going to happen. I know from working with Upset, this is something that he was really good at creating these scenarios to funnel resources. He's very, very good at that, and he's very good at carrying the game once he's ahead. Like, I don't think this is necessarily a bad strategy. It's just very reliant on one thing going well. So like the wave is slow pushing in, TF starts running bot, and they go for junglers there, and they just punish you. Especially if you don't have summoner spells, you're just dead.
Yeah, and credit to Abadage too, because it turns out obviously being able to mirror TF ult with a Silas, and then the way you guys were playing it too. Nisqy never really had a chance to affect this game because he was either shoved in or you were intercepting him time after time when he was trying to make these plays. Because it's like, oh, TF is gone. Where's he going? We know exactly where he's going, right?
Well, in game 2, for example, like Victor is shoving in TF under his turret at 40% HP. Well, as soon as I see this in game 2, like as soon as I saw how Victor TF matchup was going, I was pretty happy with the situation for sure.
In game 2, one of the aspects I found everybody was questioning was obviously self-made on the Lee Sin. When the Lee Sin was drafted, I actually thought it might be going top as a kind of. Were you guys concerned about that at all? Because I was watching this draft unfold and I was like, surely is this a Whippo like top Lee Sin that's about to happen here? Because it's not terrible in lane right now, I think. And I thought at least they would have a little bit more like smoke and mirrors around the pick, not just slotting it straight into the because you must have been happy when you saw it going to the jungle because you didn't know, right? You were playing blue side.
So Selfmade had played I think 5 games in a row of Lee Sin on his solo queue account before he came to the studio. So
you were confident.
Also, actually, BrokenBlade was talking to me a lot about Lee Sin top, in the past couple of days asked me to play it. Obviously, I said no because it's not. I don't think it's good. But
I think it's good in solo
it was
queue.
something that we talked about. But in the moment when jungle is locked in at that position in the draft, and like there's 5 pick for top counter pick, and he just played a bunch of Lee Sin games before he came to the studio, and
That's
they're
fair.
down 0-1, and he's probably not like they're not too happy. I was pretty sure this one was going.
What do you actually make in general of what's going on with Selfmade and Fnatic? Because, like, put it this way, I mean, Selfmade himself made that comment on the stream before he actually played the match. Like, if I lose a best of 5 to Gilius, like,
Yeah.
if you look at the reputation of the two players, aside from that miracle run, Gilius has always been a bit of a meme and usually like an average jungler in LEC level. Whereas Selfmade, coming off that off season, he looked like the best jungler in the entire West. He looked incredible after Worlds. So, like, I'm sure a lot of people are very shocked at the way his split's gone. What do you think his issue has been? What's the disconnect? Has he just played badly? What do you think of this split for Selfmade?
I think he's very good. He was very good at playing Graves. This sort of carry jungle meta. He's very good at taking resources on the map and getting ahead of the curve of the game. Really, really taking over the game. I'm not sure what it is about the current jungle meta, which is a lot more tanks, and it's still like you can still farm a lot and get ahead of the game and take over the game. And I think he can do this. And it's for me, it's really hard to say, especially for such a team focused role like jungle, without being on the team myself and knowing.
Of course,
Because
yes.
like there's a lot of difficult personalities on that team. Jungle relies on like communication and your team being good, and like there's weird picks like Lee Sin going off. Like I'm not really sure like what's going on with him. But obviously it was not the greatest set from him, but not the greatest set from the whole team, I'd say.
I mean, he
Anyways,
wasn't. I
like
feel like in this series, he was never set up to succeed.
yeah,
In game
exactly,
one,
exactly.
he's playing Olaf. There's a TF and a Lulu in his solo lanes, so you know where he's going. So if he goes bot with TF, it's a really easy read, and he does. There's not a lot of room for like experimentation or loose play or like adaptive play in that scenario. There's kind of like one option in
And he's
many
playing
ways.
tier two junglers for the first 2 games, and then the third game they're 0-2 in the set, and clearly
Yes.
not like
Yeah.
feeling too good about the way things are going, right?
Yeah,
So
game 2 he plays Lee Sin for
yeah,
some reason that I still
and,
don't understand.
and
And
it's
then
Lee Sin
game
for Volley
3,
there too. So
yeah, and then game 3 it's like it's Volibear. And so it feels like he never was able to get onto a pick that was going to, I mean, Hecarim's just banned, right? So what are if you're a self-made here, what are your choices? He made his name on Fnatic last year playing Graves, like carry junglers, and this is
What
just
is the
not it.
distinction here then? Because obviously, like as you say, like if you look at Worlds, for example, there was some champions there where people it was all about the jungle, like they were the monsters of the tournament. Like, what's the contrast in like even though you are playing farming junglers sometimes, how is it different from the ones that we were playing last year? Like, because obviously Selfmade's a player where it's night and day his performance at the moment.
well, like all the junglers now, you have to be able to clear fast. If you cannot clear fast, if you're a champion like Lee Sin, for example, you're like kind of at a disadvantage just from the start because it's so hard to come back from level disadvantages. And even if you get kills or get ganks off, if enemy cycles your jungle like one time, it's so hard for your
Right.
team to
You
play the
fall like
game
2 levels
afterwards.
behind. It's brutal.
Yeah, it's just so hard. So I think there's like the carry junglers. There's like Nidalee, Graves, champs like this. They were very very strong early in the split. And I think it's something my team struggled with a lot picking up. Actually, it was kind of difficult for us. And I think someone like Selfmade's really good at it. These champs do damage. They're mobile. They can carry the game. But right now, at least in LEC, it's a lot more chem tank meta where it's just tank junglers, where your role is a lot more to just like be there at the right timings, facilitate the fights, engage if you're playing an engaged champ.
So the kills even are a bit deceptive at the moment, because as you say, you could in theory get a gank off, but if they just farm your jungle, like
Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
not even matter, even if the scoreboard looks like you're leading,
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Even if you play a champ like Lee Sin and you get a gank off and it's like a super creative gank and you kill the guy, but enemy like is up 10 CS and then cycles your jungle once as a response, like you're not winning this game.
It's not only the level advantage too, it's that if your jungle gets cleared, if you're the team that just cleared the enemy jungle, you have play options, which are gank or farm your own jungle. Whereas the enemy jungler sometimes literally has nothing to do except gank, right? Or take some like dumb play into your jungle, like very risky play. So in a way, it limits your opponent's choices of what they can do. Not only can they not just farm to come back, but you kind of know that they don't have anything to do besides go to one of the lanes, which makes it kind of easy to read, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for sure.
By the way, how would you contrast bringing in BrokenBlade then? Because one of the things I found interesting was, on paper, that was actually one of the big hits that happened to your team. You lost Odoamne, who I'm pretty sure, at least people who can watch the game, know is one of the better players at his position in the league. Went to obviously a potential contender for the championship itself. So in theory, you bring in a player, even though BrokenBlade was good on TSM, people might expect that might be a position that might lapse, but it's been pretty good this split so far. Obviously, they're sort of different mentalities, right? Because Odoamne, even though people want him to play carries, traditionally tends to veer the other way, whereas BrokenBlade seems like he wants to be a carry player. So what's been the contrast there between these two?
I think from like a behind the scenes perspective, from like having a very, very strong voice in review and strong voice in match preparation and just like a shot color in game, I think that definitely was very, very noticeable. Losing Odoamne, and I think like especially when we first started scrimming, it's just the team had to restructure itself a bit differently, like the way we functioned losing someone like that. I think in game they're very just different players. I don't think BrokenBlade has played worse at all though than Odo this split overall. I think they're both like top. I would say like top three top laners in the league.
I mean,
in
I
terms of,
thought Broken's
yeah,
performance against Fnatic and G2 was really good.
yeah.
The Darius was. I think he's a very different kind of player, but you're using him to his strengths.
Yeah, and I had to learn to kind of use him a bit differently than using Odo as well. So it's just the champion pool is different. The whole way our team functions kind of just changed a lot, and it took some time for sure to adjust to it. But I'm really happy we have him.
And it, like, was that, I think you guys as a team, and one of the things that I've really enjoyed about you is that you have adapted really nicely. It seems like you and the rest of the coaching staff have a very good idea of how to use your players properly and how to kind of maximize them to your strengths, because coming in with the Darius was quite clever, but also quite surprising, right? And then shifting that play style from one week to the next versus Fnatic was also really cool to see. But you weren't necessarily running BrokenBlade. Like the Darius wasn't coming out again, right? You're playing, pretty safe matchups with the Gangplank instead. Now still a carry champion, but really like radically different style of play. How do you switch from week to week on how your players are approaching the game? Because it's hard to, I think, get the players to understand the different win conditions and then implement them properly in the game, right?
Uh, I think as far as like you were saying before about maximizing, I think that's something me and like Rodrigo, our analyst, did a really good job of this split. Is just identifying at a certain point, especially when we're losing all of our games, what actually works for us and what style of play will actually get us the win in a stage match and like an official match. Um, and I think that's something I've always actually done a really good job at through almost all of my seasons, even though my teams have had ups and downs. Like when it really came to like the end of the split or the end of the year, when my teams need to really perform, like I have a very, very good idea of like creating a blueprint for how to actually like make my players perform well. Um, as for preparing for different teams, I think that a lot of it is just like we just set goals and we set things that we're hyper focused on during our practice weeks. And for example, versus Fnatic, it's just a full week of like which midways are we contesting, which win ways are we not contesting. We just drill this and we focus on this for the full week. And anytime someone dies in this sort of scenario, like we look at it and we just make sure that we know what we're doing. As for a draft perspective, we're just talking to the players about bot 3v3 for like hours every day for like a week, right? Like just make sure that we're not trolling in any of these drafts so we get snowballed on.
How do you prepare for an opponent like Fnatic when you have to scrim against teams that are not Fnatic, and you've identified this very particular play style and this very particular weakness that you want to exploit, but your scrim opponents may not be emulating that style, but you're trying to play comps that will play well. How do you prepare? It's difficult, right?
It's sometimes the practice is just not good. There's no solution. Sometimes you want to practice against prepare for Reckless for 2 weeks, but enemy keeps locking in Caitlyn. Like what are you gonna do? Like obviously Reckless isn't gonna lock in Caitlyn on stage.
So what do you? I'm saying,
You
what
have
do
your
you
band.
do? What do you do?
Sometimes we go into scrims against enemy AD carry when you're going against Reckless and you just ban Caitlyn, Kalista, something every single game for every single scrim set. And just hope the practice is a bit better. Like it's just part of the what practice is in professional League of Legends. Sometimes the scenarios you practice during the week aren't the ones for stage. So you just have to talk about it. You have to maybe look at some footage. You need to maybe like remind them before the game on stage about like the 2 key points. It's just you got to find alternate ways to get around it, I guess.
Yeah, it does seem like it's really challenging in order to make those preparations, but you guys have done a good job. Before we talk about the Rogue series, you mentioned kind of your losing streak. I think you guys lost 7 in a
7
row.
games in a row, yeah.
This
Third
split.
split in a row the third split in a row that we lost 7 games in a row.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask, because then we
Yeah.
go back to last year. You guys had to go on your miracle run because your record was poor to get into the playoffs. How are you able to break the funk and then go on these crazy win streaks? Because I don't see another team do it with this consistency. First off, losing that many games in a row. So how does that start? And then how do you flip the switch to get back into a place where your players have confidence on stage again and are able to reel off these victories and make these kind of very good playoff performances?
I think a lot of it comes from like the leadership on our team, whether it's me or our players that are more leaders, is that we're kind of like I try from like a top down to have this kind of like relentlessly positive mindset that we're even if we could lose 20 games in a row, but I actually still believe that our players are really, really good. Um, Also, there's a lot that we can remind ourselves as well because we have like one of the best records against G2 that any team in the LEC has, for example. We have one of the best records against Fnatic in the past like year or so than almost any of the teams. Like we actually have shown this and our players have shown this. So like if from top down you have that sort of like positivity, I think it become good. I think also both times, in both last summer and this split, at a certain point, like I just had a meeting with the guys and I just said like just stop. We need to stop playing shit that's too hard to play and we need to simplify it and simplify our game plans. And I think both times it was kind of similar. Like we're playing a lot of like hard to execute team comps that maybe like better teams could play. But like at some point I just kind of laid down the law and said, no, it's over now. Like we need to start winning some games.
In line with what you said earlier about how you feel like at the end of the year, at the end of the split, you always have like the sense of who the team is, their identity, how they should play, etc. It sounds like that's actually an area you have a contrast with the other coaches, because I've seen plenty of teams start splits great and look like some of the best in the league, and then, you know, sometimes they don't even make playoffs, or they make playoffs and they're irrelevant. Like to me, when I look at your teams, like it seems like you're, as you're saying, you're very pragmatic, right? Eventually you just realize, look, these things we can do and potentially have a chance to win. These other things we can try them, but what's the point in being bad at it and just failing, right?
Like I think even when I coached Fnatic, for example, like Hilly and Bwipo were like jailed for the whole year, like pretty much on their champion choices. And the person who got to play the crazy stuff was Caps. Like that was just what I felt was the best for that iteration of Fnatic, and it's what we did for the year. Whereas
some would say Whipple might
it depends on the team, right?
might need to go back to that prison. I don't think he was rehabilitated in that scenario.
I don't mean that in like a negative
No,
way.
no,
Or
of course.
They're obviously like some of the best players in the world.
Those are just the pinch points in the
But
team, of
it
course.
just we needed, for example, Braum for 40 games because it just enabled the play style that we needed to play as a team. It's just what it was for that year, for that time, for whatever was needed.
Well, listen, mate, that alone makes you a unique coach there. When you say, listen, Hilla-sang, I'm sorry, it has to be Braum for you for the rest of the year. Like, not a lot of coaches would do that. A lot of coaches, they might just play into that fucking fresh pike meta or whatever.
Well, especially when you get the pressure from the player, right?
Only Thresh and Pike for the whole year, and it was really, really good for them for that iteration of the roster, by the way.
True.
When they got rid of, when they no longer had Caps, and they had Nemesis, which was more of like a scaling player,
yes,
it actually was way better for them. So it's not like
of course, yeah.
Hilly,
No, the balance of the teams that we're talking about here. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Let's head into the Rogue matchup here, because I alluded to this earlier, but you come in and you have to play against Fnatic and you have this game plan, and then 2 days later you have to play against Rogue, which is a phenomenally different team, much more reserved, much more playing for the late game, much less likely to take risks on the map or play aggressively. So how did you, over those 2 days, make this transition? Because I assume like you just can't prep for Rogue at all. You got to focus on the Fnatic map, and then you have very limited time to turn it around.
So prep for Rogue was very, very low, I would say. It's just you have to take it. You have a day, to kind of look at it. I don't think Rogue is a team that actually plays slow and plays for late game. I think that they also have a pretty set blueprint of what they do. They're kind of like macro Fnatic, I would say. Odo is like often in the early game playing weak side, but they really like pushing lanes, They're often trying to draft for pushing lanes in 2 to 3 lanes. You saw in our series they played Tristana mid in a winning matchup. They played Ashe mid in a winning matchup pushes. They were drafting Kalista in game 2 and game 3. In their sets before, Aphelios Thresh push, push, push. Lots of Jace games on Odo Omne. And then they use that to just play really, really good macro around their jungler. They'll try and take Rift Heralds when they can. They'll take Drakes when they can. If they're playing a playmaking bot lane, they'll probably like gank bot like once or twice, for example. They'll like gank bot on a slow push, gank bot on a slow push again, rotate for Herald, take the Herald at 8 minutes. Their junglers ahead of level, their bot lanes ahead from their early plays. And then they just play like really, really good, clean macro. I think often their team fighting is a bit weaker. For example, in this last 2 games we played, I think both games we had a comp that should win team fights. And at some point, the games were within like 1,000 gold, both games, game 3s and 4. But I think we kind of just got outplayed a bit, and maybe the pressure was a bit too much, like map pressure, I mean. But I think they're very good at using pushing lanes to enable their jungler, and their just macro is really, really good. And I think that's probably their biggest strengths.
I do think that perhaps Rogue does get more labeled that way because they don't take a lot of risks, right?
No,
And they'll just fall back to their turret and not give you an opportunity to make a play. But it's not like they're not being active on the map. Inspired is often invading the enemy jungle, or as you say, going after the river objectives. They play PvE. It's not that it's slow, it's that, or they're scaling, it's that they're playing the game right.
yeah, I think like if you're a pro player and you're sitting under your turret, an enemy just took Herald and then they walk to your lane and they pop the Herald and then they invade your Raptors. Like, okay, the kill score for the viewers might not be that good, but
Sure.
you definitely don't feel like the enemy team is playing slow or scaling or anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're definitely pushing the advantages that they have. But the best way to play League of Legends is simply to out rotate your opponent so they have no opportunity to respond. Right? That's in an ideal world. That is the best. That is the superior
to
way
me,
to play
I think
the game.
fans are just like conflating like player, because obviously if you think of like, when I think of Rogue, I think of Larson. It's the fucking mid lane and he's a star player for me. So when I think of the team, I think they're conflating like some of his strengths as an individual player, which is like, he is just like the modern day Frog, and he's just going to farm the fucking lane up and just carry if he gets that Orianna late game, of course. But like, the reason I always found that weird as well is like, I know they did try to play scaling last year, but like, to me, Inspired's an early game jungler, mate. Like, that guy wants to fucking get busy on the map early.
Yeah, I think it's just more farm and objective focused, and I think he's ganking bot a lot early for sure. That is something we definitely noticed in our scouting. It's like a lot of the times it's like early gank bot into Herald rotation, for example. That's like a common rogue special.
A lot of people were talking about Neon's performance later in the series, as he was definitely having some struggles. Like I rewatched game 4 between you guys before the show this morning, and he did seem at times like he was pretty aggressive in his approach, especially on the kind of critical fight that you guys were playing in the mid lane where he zoomed in. And some of that's like a bunch of people flashing on him, which happens, right? Sometimes you have to make those aggressive plays. But compared to the previous playoff series that you had, did you feel that Neon was having an off day, or were there things about kind of Hans Sama playing and Trimby playing these aggressive Kalista lanes that were giving him trouble?
Well, it's really hard, I think, for him, especially in, I think it was game 3, the one we lost to Kalista, the first loss to Kalista. Like
Yep.
I don't think Neon has his best series for sure, but like as a viewer, sometimes people just see like 0-4 and they're like, oh, this guy's feeding. But if like you have no summoners and the wave is pushing into the enemy, and enemy mid has push and his jungler's there, and they have Kalista, like the strongest early game gank setup like ADC in the game, like it's hard. It's a really, really hard scenario to play, and often it requires like our mid jungle to play differently, or maybe our top doesn't have TP advantage, even though we put resources top. But for example, in one game, like we lost mid TP early, right? And then we're actually kill the Kalista and we're winning bot, but enemy mid has TP advantage because of whatever. I forget what happened in the mid lane, and then just get TP'd behind. And yeah, maybe if they're super on the ball, they could have like swept the ward or something. But I think it's a lot more complicated than just saying like Neon played bad because he died a bunch. Obviously, the Kai'Sa ult in the last game probably wasn't very good, but I don't even know if we win the fight anyways. I haven't really rewatched it, but yeah.
That's fair. You don't have to rewatch it for a bit,
Yeah.
right?
It was a bad engage, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. I liked some of the adaptations that you guys were making, especially even though you did end up losing the third game and there was kind of this very strong Kalista in the game. I appreciated you picking the Wukong top as a team fight later game answer to try and deal with the Kalista, because playing a lot of more traditional, like if you had played Scion in top, for example, I don't know if you would have ever been able to get back to the Kalista, for instance. Was that what was going through your head in the draft?
Yeah, the idea, at least in the series, was like, okay, we won with superior team fighting comp against Kalista in game 2. Game 3, like, was really, really won, and then Kalista just got giga fed. But just because that happens in one game doesn't mean that will always happen. And like, I don't think Kalista in pro play is like this super insane, gonna get ahead no matter what champion. So yeah, we just
No,
tried to
I
pick
would say it's pretty bad, actually.
yeah, we just tried to pick good team fighting champs against Kalista and figure that if we have like strong engage and champs that can get on Kalista and lock her down, like Wukong for example, that we should be able to win the fights. And honestly, I think if we play some of these fights and situations a little bit better, I think we really would have won with our drafts. I think they played better. So
I see Kalista as a pretty big risk right now, at least in terms of pro play. So I was surprised to see Rogue's commitment to the pick over this series, because it does feel like there, with the how much emphasis there is on 5v5 team fighting these days, and how quickly you can get to that point if teams are approaching like soul point. It does seem like she falls off relatively quickly unless you get an absolutely insurmountable, enormous lead out of the bottom lane.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, I agree.
What was the reason for like BrokenBlade being a different champion every single game? Like, what's going on there? Because before that, he seemed to have a fairly defined champion pool.
What was the first game matchup? I'm trying to remember
The first one was Aurelia versus Karma.
Okay, yeah. Well, first game draft, I feel really bad about this one myself personally because I think this was actually one of those rare cases where the game is actually probably not winnable from draft against a team that is playing like really, really well, which they were. That's just lane counter. You saw he got like up 100 CS and killed him twice, for example. But like, I think Aurelia probably wasn't useful enough against enemy champs. Team comp actually had no engage tools to actually like get the Aurelia into the fight. So it ended up being like kind of a greedy pick, and we didn't play the rest of the map good enough to win. I think game 2 was what?
The Nocturne one.
Oh, Nocturne. Okay, yeah. This was the one thing that we got to prep between the Fnatic set and the Rogue set was Nocturne flex between like mid and top lane and I guess
Okay.
jungle.
So this might have actually gone to mid.
Yeah, you can
Yeah.
play it. You can play it jungle. You can play it mid. You can play it top. We already played it mid, right? In
Okay.
the last week of LEC
Sure.
with the
Yep.
Nocturne Karthus team.
It was
yeah.
good.
Yeah. And the idea behind that, I guess it's where our season's over, so I can
Yeah.
say is like Oda was playing a lot of Jace and Gnar blinds only. These were like his only blinds, so I thought it would be really good for the set to have at least one champ that I feel would fit with the engage comps we were playing that was also good against Jace
Right.
and Gnar. So we did a bunch of research and that was the one I came up with that, and we just spammed it like 5 games in a row on Saturday, and it's just what we prepared, and I guess it got us a win, so it was pretty good. Wukong was just a team fighting counter to Kalista, also winning matchup against Urgot. He also solo killed him in this game, so I think it was a good pick.
I was surprised because I didn't know that about the Wukong Urgot matchup at all.
Yeah,
because I mean I don't
apparently,
see it. So
yeah, apparently it's good. It's Wukong winning. You can like block a lot of the moves with your clones, for example, and then in the all-in you can win.
Hmm.
Urgot's kind of OP champ though, so it's still like I'm still not unhappy if I were to be playing the Urgot side on my team.
Fair enough.
What was the attitude that you guys had?
Yeah, go on.
Sorry. What was the attitude you guys had after this loss? Because I know this was probably really hard, but considering the end of your season, your very strong performance, taking G2 to 5 games, like convincingly dumpstering Fnatic, and then this was a really competitive series overall. So I look at Schalke and I say, wow, this is like a great playoffs performance. It's kind of what would have wanted to have happen at the end of summer 2020, where you guys like make it to playoffs, but you don't actually go that far, or like seem like a legitimate contender. Because coming into this Rogue match, nobody would think it was ridiculous to say that Schalke is going to win this series after seeing you guys play.
I think both sets were very close, and both sets were very winnable. I do think like right now at least we are a bit behind the top 3 teams just from scrimming them a lot and seeing our stage results against them throughout the year. I think we still didn't have that great of a results versus the top 3 teams throughout all of this year. But I think it feels good to know that we're competitive, especially considering at one point I was wondering if we would be able to make playoffs. Being pretty solidly like 4th place and able to take games and maybe even sets off the top 3, I think is good. Like the goal of this team is just to make the World Championships. That's I think everybody came to this team for that very specific reason. And it's kind of like bittersweet that I think it's possible and that really encourages us a lot, but I still think we're not quite there yet.
Let's talk about some of the other games then, because obviously there was the series of Mad Lions and G2, and now we've got the Rogue versus G2 one, so we can kind of preview that. Right, for the G2 Mad Lions one, I actually thought a great comment was by Damonte on Twitter, because he made this distinction, which was, I thought, pretty key, which is if you think of the other losses, like they almost lost to you guys, obviously. If you go back when they lost to Fnatic in the upper bracket in the summer, if people don't remember, that was the one where like they almost like had one of those games just won and like hard through at the fucking inhibitors, if you remember. Like that was a series they very much could have won when they lost to Mad Lions a year ago. That was another series where it was like a super back and forth series, again with a crazy game 4, right? Dominate's point on Twitter was every other time G2 lost in one of these scenarios, you could always just say as an analyst, like kind of the lazy analysis, like, well, they didn't play that well individually and they'll probably get it together later. I thought his point was pretty good. This Mad Lions series, they just were outclassed. Like that Mad Lions was just a better team in this series. That wasn't luck. That wasn't like, one guy had woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Like Mad Lions looked like the better team. So to me, that's a big distinction from the past G2s. What do you think, Dylan?
Yeah, and just from talking to by players as well, like they felt like just the feel of playing versus Rogue and playing versus G2, they felt like actually G2 just felt like weaker, like it felt like there's more opportunities, there's more plays, it's just, and even from a preparation standpoint for me, I do think they're not having their best few weeks right now. That's just what I would say. I think Wonder hasn't had the best few weeks as well. I know he uninstalled WoW or something the other day, so maybe he's gonna start practicing a bit more. I think Caps usually in these clutch moments when he's super fed on Tristana in this first game, I think most splits he would just carry the game. But he made a lot of mistakes as well. I think a lot of people are criticizing their drafting a lot. I think it's a very common thing, to just blame the drafts. Don't think the drafting was that bad. I don't like playing tier 2 junglers in the meta right now. That's just my personal opinion. I think it's a pretty basic one, but I think even they adapted to start picking tier 1 junglers in their set, and I don't think they'll make that mistake in the future. But yeah, it does seem like they're struggling a bit, and they look a bit weaker than they have in the past for sure.
What did you think, Monty?
I think it's interesting that they were blue side banning Hecarim instead of first picking it. Like I agree, and especially seeing stuff like the Trundle come out, that it's a bit suspect, but I don't think that their comps were necessarily bad. I understand the logic, like especially if you're G2, you're coming off that win versus you guys in game 5 and you have the Seraphine, right? Seraphine is being banned by Mad Lions, which I think is smart. Like you don't want to see them play that composition or that style again. So they try and sort of accomplish the same thing. It's like a pseudo version of that comp by putting in the Karma instead, right? Because you have the staff Moonstone Karma, which I think they were just trying to replicate that, although with more speed and less healing, right? But it's kind of a similar style, especially if you're going to go with the Lucian again in the mid lane. And I can see why, if you're concerned about them having a tanky front line and your damage output, that you would pick a Trundle for the ult. So it makes like destroying a target out of position in a team, because like that's what's underrated about Trundle, I think, is like if you catch somebody out in a team fight and you pillar and then ult them, they just explode, right? They're just dead. So I think you can take certain advantages out of that situation, but to me it feels like they're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist, or they're overemphasizing that style. Because I look at the game 5 versus Schalke and I think, wow, it's cool to know that they can play this style, but should it be the definitive style? No, right? What that does is it draws a Seraphine ban out, and then I first pick Hecarim.
Yeah.
right.
Like
so like I feel like they're over engineering their own problem in a way, right? Like it's like, wow, we forced you to ban something that you don't want to ban because we have this wacky thing we can do that is really good. But to then have that ban and then try and do it anyway, that's what's weird to me. That's what's weird to me.
So I think Tristana mid is probably like the strongest mid laner, if not one of the strongest mid laners in the game right now. If you can get it in a proper matchup and get resources with it, because champion pushes the lane and hyper carries with like the last whisper changes, for example, and just the way it works are just really, really, really strong. That's why you see Jinx, Tristana, like all these just hyper carries that can take over the game. I actually think the blueprint of playing an enchanter bot lane and actually putting your AD carry mid lane theoretically is super good. I think I wouldn't be surprised if one day teams start doing this more commonly, because I think your enchanter is in a lane where your Moonstone actually interacts with your support, for example.
Sure.
You're actually playing a supportive champion in a lane where there's actually another champion to like buff and support with. You can put your mid laner mid where he gets more levels and more farm early, and then put him in the side lane after, where he can get even more ahead of the state of the game. And you can actually like allocate.
It's very
your
true with Tristana too, because you
yeah,
actually
yeah,
do
with
create
Tristana especially,
a
like
split push threat. Yeah.
yeah. And I think you can allocate your resources onto this Tristana to a way where I think this combo is really, really, really strong. I actually don't think they played it too well. I think Caps just kind of like choked the team fights. And I think it's really important if you're playing like this kind of play style. I think the matchups need to be good. I think that's really important. Like for example, when Rogue played Tristana, they just banned Orianna to first pick Tristana. And I think that's like way, way, way better than I think it was Tristana Orianna matchup in game one of this series.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like Triss versus Orianna, the Orianna is kind of like useful against Tristana late game as well. So,
Yeah, I think those are some really good points, and you've won me over on those notions. I just don't understand why why you would then kind of sacrifice the jungle position, because it's not even necessary.
yeah, of course.
Here's the thing. It's like I agree with the points you're making, but you don't have to actually sacrifice jungle as a result of this, because I don't think anyone's like, unless the karma draft priority like skyrockets, it's not like you're not going to get the comp that you want, right?
So the way you should draft something like this is you pick Tristana first pick, you pick jungle support 2-3, you get priority tank jungle
Yep.
and a support, hopefully, if you're drafting this on blue side, because you can't really let enemy pick Alistar or Rel and 2 supports. Like this is kind of draft mechanic stuff. And then Tristana becomes a double or triple flex depending on your team between top, mid, and AD. And then it's really hard for team to draft 3 and 4 against you. And then if you want to pick Karma on 4-5 and go with it, it's fine, but you just get a better, stronger draft out of it. So
Yeah, and also you're not even necessarily locked into the karma either, because there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with drafting the Tristana or the Lucian and then playing another AD carry. That's what I don't understand about what's going on. Is it seems like I agree with you now on the concept being solid. It just seems like the execution of that concept and draft was weird.
Yeah, and in game as well, too. I think.
What didn't you like about it in game in particular?
I'd have to rewatch. I'm not sure if this is actually true, but I remember the feeling I got watching this game is like Reckless was kind of just like following around Caps and then just like kind of gold funneling him, and just like only shielding Caps in every single team fight, like really, really like role playing the I'm a support, sort of thing in the game. And, maybe it was actually good. Like I just remember this feeling watching the game, so I would have to like really watch it to see if it was actually good in the moments. But I think usually when Karma's played in a solo lane, it's like a supportive champion as well, but you can still like push out lanes yourself and like sometimes mantra Q the enemy as well, like this sort of stuff.
I just feel like G2 with some slight reevaluations comes back very strong, because what was weird about this series is Mad Lions is sitting on red side and they're forced to ban Seraphine, Tristana, and Senna all, like basically all the games after the first one on red side. So it really just feels like at that point, G2, you've opened up just a massive like box of possibilities in your draft, because they're so scared of these 3 picks in particular that there's just so many power picks left over for you, right? On the blue side. You should be feeling great. You should be feeling great.
You can just like first pick Hecarim and do a Hecarim Kai'Sa game, and then just everyone presses R, the Schalke special, and you just go in and kill them all. Yeah.
Speaking of which, like, if we're going to talk about people who didn't exploit the draft, even as a layman, like, I looked at this series and I was like, why the fuck is Wonder playing these champions? Like, these champions are doing nothing in the game. This is garbage. Like, as we say, if there's all these options available, and he's a player who, in theory, will try a lot of different champions. Like, why is he playing these? Like, that Akali was having no impact on the game. You could have done anything.
Yeah, I actually Akali was played a lot in Asia recently, I think, in some of these matchups, and had some good games. I also think historically, Wonder's been a really, really good Akali in playoffs and clutch situations. But I don't know, he didn't take flash, and then he got ganked level 3 and died. So it's that my top laner also doesn't take flash sometimes, and then often the jungle comes and ganks you and you die. But I do think Ignite Akali's fine. I'm not saying it's bad. It's what happens sometimes.
They also did win that game, to be fair.
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
But I agree.
No,
it's true. Yes, I agree with you also on that point. No, I agree. I think
it's not bad, by the way. I think it's fine.
All right.
So you like the Akali
what did he
Gnar
play?
matchup?
I forget what he played in the other games.
Game 1 he played Sylas into Gnar. Game 2 he played Gragas into Gnar. Game 3 he played the Akali into Gnar. And then Game 4 he played Jace into Gnar.
Also, as just
so it took him 4 games to get to like a real fucking normal matchup, basically.
Yeah. Also, why do they have? Here's my question for you, Dylan. Why do they have 4 different counters to Gnar?
Well, I think some of these Gnar. Gragas
isn't it weird? Isn't it weird as a team to come into a draft and play 4 different champions into the same matchups in 4 games? That very rarely happens.
Yeah, it does. I think Gragas versus Gnar, that's definitely a bit of a cursed matchup. Not winning. They probably just picked it because they needed a tank because they were running and they also needed AP damage, right? They're running their Lucian Karma trap. So it's like tank, engage, they need AP threat. So I think that's why that one came through. I think the matchup's a bit too cursed to play. Sylas versus Gnar is the matchup every top laner in the world wants to play. It's their favorite matchup in ever, actually. But it's the matchup that the Gnar always seems to win for whatever reason.
Right.
Unless you are, I think it's the Shy in one game last year, he got 25 kills or something. I don't know. It was really crazy.
So it's the one where the players think it's the good matchup, but as the coach, you're like, I don't want to see that.
Well, there is a point where you start winning, and you start winning hard, especially if you're ahead. So
right,
it's a risky one. Let's just put it that way.
Well, it's also that the Sylas copying the Gnar ult isn't gated around Mega Gnar, which is powerful.
That's OP as fuck.
Yeah. So basically, like the thing that makes Gnar balanced is that he doesn't have his ult in mini Gnar form, right? So when you're zooming around on Sylas or hitting people with Everfrost and chaining it into Gnar ult, it gets pretty gross in team fights.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if you get it on side lane and you're 1v1ing the Gnar and he's mini and you just ultimate to the wall, this guy's dead.
So one player
very hard to work, especially early.
One of the Mad Lions players I want to ask about is Elyoya, the jungler, because to me, this guy has to be one of the revelations of the year thus far. Because last year, everyone now has retconned it that Shadow was always something. But every time he logged in Lee Sin, people were cleaning their pants last year.
He was
having highlight games all over the place. So the idea that you're going to get rid of him completely in some mysterious way that's never been fully explained, and bring in a guy from the RLs who had a little bit of hype behind him, but he certainly wasn't, by the way, hyped in the way that Self-Made is. I'd even say a player like Tinks was maybe hyped more than Elyoya, but he's not only come in, he hasn't missed a fucking beat. He looks better and better as the split goes on, and how integrated he seems to be in their team is ridiculous. So give me some thoughts. What do you think about this, Dylan?
I spoke with him a bit during the offseason. I think he's very, very good. I think that a lot of people behind the scenes actually did hype him a lot.
Okay.
I think it probably wasn't something the Twitter people were talking about or stuff like this, but I think behind the scenes in the actual orgs themselves, I think that he was a very, very, very sought after player and wanted player. And yeah, this kid just comes in, goes one split in the 2nd Division Spain League, goes to 1st Division Spain League MVP, and then just top 2 solo queue the whole year while getting double MVPs in national leagues. I think a lot of teams that were paying attention knew he would be quite good. And I think it was a really good fit for him at Mad Lions as well. Team that's really good at working with rookie players, had already onboarded a bunch of rookies and been very successful with them, as well as a Spanish org as well, really good, and one of the top orgs. And it was a good fit for him. And yeah, he's just, this guy is skyrocketing, from in 2 years or something.
I thought it was especially impressive that his first kind of LEC stage performance was one where, speaking of teams that we were talking about how you adapt, I really liked the way that Mad Lions was playing against Rogue in their series, because it felt like the Volibear pick was enabling a lot of plays, because when we were talking about Rogue earlier, when they like to kind of pull it back a little bit when there isn't an objective on the map or they're not playing anything, the Volibear allowed them just to like dive Larson and like kind of prevent that style of play or accelerate the gameplay in a way that seemed to make Rogue very uncomfortable. And he was making some like really bold plays from like Raptor Pit into mid lane, and to have him kind of be the keystone of that strategy as a rookie on stage, on a big stage for the first time in playoffs, was really impressive to me.
Yeah, I said on the broadcast actually, like Volibear can do dives and make plays in those moments that no other champ can because of like the whole turret thing. And it was cool to see him just like really, really going for it in his first best of 5 on stage.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like, I wouldn't have expected that level of composure from a player like Elyoya, given his limited playtime at the top level, and also limited playtime on a stage like that, which can give players jitters. And yeah, I mean, it just continued over the course of the series. And I think right now, if we're looking forward to the finals next week, Mad Lions has convincingly beaten Rogue. They've convincingly beaten G2, which were the teams that most people would have guessed
hands
would have
down the
been in the
best teams in
finals.
LEC. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
And so,
Yeah.
and like, because they were 3-1s and because the games themselves, with the eye test, looked very dominant from Mad Lions.
Yes.
Now we're suddenly in a conversation, which is, are they the favorites for the LEC?
Yeah, I'd say right now probably. Behind the scenes, they've always, I think, probably been the best team scrims that we played against, at least. That I always felt that way watching them play. So seeing them finally like stop throwing the games and getting some good reads on the meta for draft as well, it's just like, I don't know, they're just playing really, really well. I wouldn't be surprised if they win, but I think any team that has like Caps Reckless on it, you always need to kind of think about that too.
Of
And
course.
then
I also
yeah.
I also think
Also
just based on our conversation, like there's just a couple things you do differently in draft, and all of a sudden G2 becomes
Yeah,
really
of
terrifying.
course. And I honestly like from talking to the players, my players, they said that like Rogue felt really, really difficult to play against as well, and that they're actually quite good the way they play around like their jungler and pushing their lanes. So I honestly could see a universe in which any of these 3 teams wins.
All right, let's get some thoughts then on the G2 Rogue matchup, because this is the one where coming in, like a lot of people, I know your team obviously ended up overperforming what people's expectations. A lot of people, I think, were in a similar camp to me. It was like, right, this split's basically, can Rogue play against G2? If they can, maybe we'll have some fun in playoffs. Otherwise, it's just going to be G2 waltzing and winning the league. Well, now, like they play, but they're only going to play this low bracket matchup. So we're not even going to get the 2 matchups that we maybe could have had in this format, right? Who do you actually favor going into this one? Like you've said before, and your players said it, like at times in the game, G2 feels vulnerable. Like they feel beatable now. Like, who do you have winning this one out of Rogue and G2, Dylan? Who do you favor?
Honestly, I'm not too sure. I think I would give G2 just the credit. I think just from sheer roster strength and having a full week to like really analyze what went wrong, what style they want to play, and go in with a plan, and being able to perform under like that sort of a pressure scenario. I would give it to G2, but I think so far in playoffs, Rogues has definitely played. I think Rogue has played better than G2 so far.
I agree with that. I think, yeah, I've especially this last weekend, I thought Rogue's performance looked much more on point, and I feel like they were kind of
also doesn't look as bad to lose to Mad Lions now, Monty. It looked pretty bad when the playoffs began and you had a top seed. Now all of a sudden it's looking all right to lose to Mad Lions. You know, fair
sure.
play.
I thought that they were thrown for a loop by what Mad Lions was doing to them.
The draft and they get what they want and they win a game first couple of games. Probably beat anyone back. They could also lose to a lot of teams, it feels like.
Yeah. So
Cool. Well, that will, I think, wrap up some of the LEC discussion. Unless you want to make a bold prediction on the finals, you think G2 is still going to be the favorite if they end up heading to finals, or is this Mad Lions? Are we seeing the kind of changing of the guard from the traditional Fnatic G2 dominance?
I think Mad Lions will win, actually.
One thing I think would be cool though is, listen, I actually personally think, just for the sake of like Mad Lions getting like legitimacy if they win, I think it would help if they get to play G2 again, just because of the storyline and they're like the champions of the play.
Yeah.
Obviously that would help the thing, but if there's a world where Rogue beats G2 in the final, it's Mad Lions versus Rogue. I tell you what, considering everyone hyped the fact that G2 being the best team in the world in 2019, like changed the game, it didn't really. It just made people think LEC's best team can be better. The real game changer would be if you have these particular cores of players contending for the championship like a year into coming into the league. Like, that's crazy. Like, in my opinion, that would be the very interesting sort of like sea change of how maybe people even think of LEC.
But these two teams were first and second place last summer, right?
Sure.
In regular season.
In the regular split,
They were at the top of the league with a huge
Yes.
gap between them and G2. Like, it's not unheard of, right? But G2 was just very, very clutch in the playoffs, and it's G2, so they turn it on when it matters.
Yeah, that's what I mean though, because that was the sentiment though. It's like, but who cares in the best of ones? Because G2 and Fnatic will always be in the final, blah blah blah. If that's not even the case at all now, I'll be very interested to see the coming years in terms of how people think of their veteran names. Like, will they just go for rookie talent even more so? I could see a world where people just go based off eye tests now.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, that'll wrap up the LEC portion of this show. Let's take a quick break here again. And Dylan can go away. Thor and I are going to answer some quick questions at the end of the show from the GrogCoin Discord channel there on the Inside on Esports Discord. But thanks for joining us. Good luck
guys.
next split, man. Sorry you didn't make it further in the playoffs.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Cheers, mate.
Okay, see ya.
All right, we're back with some Q&A from the GrogCoin 25 channel. If you hold 25 Grog coins, we'll do this at the end of the shows that we've got. So without further ado, they might be league
How
questions.
much is one Grog coin at the moment worth, roughly?
$2 around, I think.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
So
What's
and
the
also
amount then?
Yeah, you can hold you hold those guys, so it's not like you continuously pay them, right? So and you can also sell them. So should you so choose. But it is helping us out with support of this. So
just in case that's unclear, what Monty means is if you buy the coins, you can just ask a question each time. In theory, you don't have to like buy them again next week.
Yeah, you're not spending them. Yeah, you just have to hold on to them while they're in your crypto wallet. So we'll do a question about this. Lemonian. We'll go with that. We kind of already answered this. Would you guys have rather seen 100 Thieves play Damonte on roaming champions, Doinby style, like I Will Dominate said, and then playing Ryoma? And would you have think it would be given them a better chance for a third?
Put it this way, I think I've been pretty consistent on this throughout the entire history of Summoning Insight. I always hated the idea of like global meta thinking and the idea that basically it's what Doublelift famously said that his own career invalidated, which is just take the nameplates off and play against the champions. It's like, of all the motherfuckers who never could get out of his mind that that's Uzi, that's Def. Like, but as usual, Doublelift is the sort of guy where he's cursed like in some Greek tradition of like everything he says is straight fire, just doesn't then re-enter his brain and apply to him. It's as it leaves his body is when it becomes fucking sick and poignant and meaningful. So basically, I've always been of the opinion that as a coach, it's actually one of the things I actually do like about Dylan Falco and always did and said in the past when he was on the bad Schalke is this guy actually seems to understand pragmatism. He understands that at some point in time, the perfect is the enemy of the good. And if I've only got, think of some of those bad Schalke lineups, if I've only got a few tools to work with, I better make something that actually works with these guys. So essentially, I'll always summarize it like this. I'd rather play to Damonte's strengths and have an off-meta approach to potentially winning, which I think will increase the variance, over having just like a poor man's version of a fucking mage mid lane. It's the same reason why when we go the other way, when we're in those metas like Season 9, where everything mid lane is like Akali, Aurelia, I'll still take Power of Evil over the fucking 6th best Akali player. Because Power of Evil's style, I can build a whole coherent style that might go counter and might make me win in a weird way in the game if I have that,
Yeah, I think for me, it's more about I wouldn't have played Ryoma on AD carry mids. So for me, if you're going to commit to the mage style, and now I agree with you, Thor, in a world where we can't know what was going on behind the scenes. For all we know, the players themselves were very supportive of this move.
People have implied that is actually apparently what happened. Like I've heard a lot of people say apparently supposedly like the teammates just sort of behind the scenes preferred Ryoma, which okay, it could be real. Yeah.
Right. So if you're in that scenario, then I think you have to do the Ryoma move because otherwise your team is basically
It might collapse the whole squad.
Confidence.
Yeah,
It might mental boom them. So without knowing if we remove that possibility of happening, then I would rather play Damonte. But if that was what was going on, then I think that you play Ryoma, but you just play him on control mages, which is the game that you won in that series, and you don't start the series playing him on 80 carries, which he looked very bad on. So that's my, like, if you're going to play the poor man's mage mid, then play the poor man's mages. Don't play 80 carries. That's to me was the very weird decision about that. And would it have given them a better chance for third? I honestly think that TS, like, given the way they played, I think their best case performance was third, their worst case performance was fourth, and it ultimately doesn't matter. So I just don't think there's that much of a difference, frankly. Here's a good question that has nothing to do
the
with...
most criminal thing to me, by the way, if you think about it as well, is think about the way 100 Thieves played both those playoff series, right? The idea you're going to play a player so he can be on a scaling control mage when we have no fucking clue what to do from
the late games
is offensive. That's actually offensive to my core. You know what I mean? That's also the reason why I'm playing Damonte, unless, as you say, it's true. Like a player.
That is a very good point.
I'd rather try and win the game early. I don't know what the fuck we're doing. Like, there's no advantages we can use at this point, you know.
When you're throwing every fight in after 20 minutes so badly that they get free barons, then you might as well play Damonte. I agree with that.
Exactly.
But I just think the ceiling on this team has basically been reached no matter what. So I'm not sure it matters a whole lot. Here's a question about Russian literature, which is fine. Right. You guys can ask this from Gerard. Have either of you really dabbled into Russian literature, Dostoevsky, Gogol, Lermontov? And if so, is there an author or book you particularly enjoy? Yes, I've actually taken college courses in Russian literature. I don't speak Russian, and I've heard that Russian literature and translation is much worse, but it's still really good. I will take some hipster picks for you. Mikhail Bulgakov and The Master and Margarita, which is a book that he wrote, is one of my favorite books of all time, one of my favorite novels. For those of you interested, it is supposedly what the Rolling Stones song Sympathy for the Devil is based off of. And the concept is that the devil and his entourage, including like a talking black cat, so it's kind of magical realism, come to St. Petersburg and cause all kinds of trouble. And it's interspersed with a narrative by this writer called The Master, who's writing an alternate history of Jesus Christ and Pontius Pilate. And it is an awesome book. And my other hipster pick is Andre Bailey, Petersburg, which is kind of like what James Joyce was before James Joyce, which is very interesting. It's like Russian James Joyce. It's weird. So there you go. Do you have any Russian literature that you particularly enjoy? I like Gogol.
Not really. Well. I mean, I like some of them, but the problem is that's one of those areas where, like I'm not one of these people who's pretentious, just pretends to be something I'm not. Like those are the sorts of books that like I have on a list or I've bought and they're on the shelf and I just never read them. Like I've read all the Dostoevsky. I thought those were fantastic. Yeah. But a lot of the ones that you've mentioned actually are ones I either literally own or have on like a list and I just never get around to them. Because the problem is, part of the issue is because these are older books as well. One of the things I actually think sets like Dostoevsky aside from other writers is it's very easy to read actually. Like, I mean, you might not know like a lot of the cultural aspects that I might get lost in here, but like it's not like reading Shakespeare where the text itself is like you're dense, you're having to get into it. And the problem with a lot of the other ones I've found is some of the other ones, it's like I think you actually have to have like a decent grounding in some of the cultural background, or you're just not going to get a lot of what's going on in it, you know.
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, I like a lot of Russian literature. Like I like I said, Story of the Nose, Gogol, like his short stories. I'm actually not the biggest Dostoevsky fan. But I like War and Peace if you're really into reading a super long book as well. Let's see here. Let's look at some other questions. Brackthier. Okay, hold on. We need desperately need import slots to be close to viable because it feels like LoL is plain dying in NA due to a variety of reasons, and a lack of PC bong / LAN culture means less influx of young players into the ecosystem. That was always true though about NA, right? It was always a small region for LoL. We always didn't have the PC bong / LAN culture. It's really an America problem when it comes to PC games in general, where America's always produced less talent because consoles are dominant in NA, and that's just the way it is.
Have I missed something? Like, did we, again, Monty, one of the things I hate about League of Legends is that I have to keep exploring these scenarios where people are like, what you say, Thorin, I guess theoretically could work. And I'm like, no, that's a real thing that happened. So, like, we already did this experiment. It was called the WCS in StarCraft 2. And what happened was everyone in StarCraft cried and said, oh, the viewership's not going up because just Koreans dominate everything. So what we need to do is lock out the Koreans out of competition. And then that'll allow like North American and European players to develop. And I'll give you the spoiler, right? I know this is going to hurt a lot of people in StarCraft 2's feelings, but those players didn't develop as in en masse, like whole crops and classes of incredible players. What happened was you had 2 players, only 2. They were called Neeb from North America and fucking, what is his name, Serral from Finland. So they're outliers. They just came along who were fantastic players. And as far as I can tell, if they had played during the Nanoa and, Stefano eras, might have been outlier players like them who were exceptional.
Sure.
Everyone else just only got slightly better results versus Koreans because you just sucked the entire life out of the Korean scene and they are just running beyond on fumes. Like, I always say this, the best Korean players, no joke, play for orgs that I've never even heard of from Europe and North America. That's how bad StarCraft 2 is. So basically, what I'm getting to is this. I've never understood what the question was. The question was never, which do you want, Thorin? Do you want to let them import really good League of Legends players, or do you want them to develop the NA players into really good League of Legends? That was, to me, always a false dichotomy. Like, who the fuck ever had access to option 2? When was option 2 ever available? Like, by the way, even if some fan goes, but you could have gotten double lift and down. You mean the players again who were outliers who just come along and are brilliant immediately? Like, no one trained these motherfuckers. So my problem basically is the question you're really asking. It's why I made my video that the alternate route isn't develop an A player. Here's the 2 options you have. Go entertainment only, in which case you can have all NA players if you want. Or do you want NA to have really competitive teams? If you want to have really competitive teams, you have to have no import restrictions. Everyone has to be available because the one thing that can make NA, the LCS, competitive with the other regions is using that fucking money. That's the one thing you have as a chance right now. So to me, I don't even know why it's a real thing that people still go back and forth on. If you want to see top quality play in LCS, you're just going to have to open up restrictions. I'm sorry, it's just a rule.
Yeah, and if you want top quality NA players, then the culture of North America has to shift from a console to a PC culture, and we have to start implementing systems from the high school or even younger level, which exist in these other countries, by the way. Like, the part of the PC bond culture is that kids from a young age are playing games competitively together, which we do not have, right? So it really is not an easily solvable problem and can truly only be solved from the grassroots, where I think the way that you get people more access to PC games is that you start having schools themselves run esports programs with PCs that kids can use at schools and get actual coaching from a young age. That's how you fix the problem. It's not going to happen for years. That's it.
You also, by the way, in my opinion, in League of Legends, another problem from contrasting all the different games I've been around is because it's both a team game and one that is heavily about information burden. I actually think it's one of the games that revolves the highest level coaching for the players to understand what's going on. Whereas in games like Counter-Strike or some of the console games, if you're just a fantastic individual mechanical player, you could do a lot in those games. You can't in League of Legends. Like, in League of Legends, you could be Dardoch, double F, like, you can just be, you can have no chance to win in the game, even versus a comparable level player from another region, if your team just doesn't know how to play the game.
All right. Mikachu asks, if you could rank the top 5 orgs with the most corruption in the recent history of esports,
people don't know, by the way.
Oh boy.
This is the guy, because he did one for our, he did like
an
one
artist.
where it was like, he's the guy who did the pictures where his theme, it was quite a cool angle, was that he put like a Bible verse in all of them. And if you look at whatever the Bible verse is, it would always actually relate to whatever the image was, you know. So like, what was his question?
What were the top 5 orgs with the most corruption? Although I will say in general, like, it's a lot easier to do this a long time ago because pretty much a lot of the org corruption has been gone.
Sure.
At least like a lot of like the really shady stuff. Like, I don't know, MYM a few years ago in League with like threatening the player's mom.
That selfie. Yeah.
The selfies. That was pretty gross.
That was pretty nuts.
That was pretty gross. I think you could make a case for a Zubu now in retrospect. Not that they were doing anything weird with the players, but that was like almost certainly a money laundering scheme as a whole.
Seems plausible, yes. Yes. Put it this way, the obvious ones would just be, I'm afraid, the boring ones from the countries where these things happen. So Moscow 5, there's one. They had the best team in the world, and the guy literally, like, didn't he go to prison for, like, credit card scamming or something?
I have no idea.
There's one. I could throw out, I won't say the specific names, but there's Chinese teams where, in my opinion, the idea that the LPL could run while one team, the same owner, owns multiple LPL teams and LDL teams as well. Like, that's just fucking corrupt to its core. Like, that's like conflict of interest at a level that's like just shouldn't even be acceptable. So like they're the obvious ones. There's not any really sexy Western ones. Like for example, if you think of the big names in the West, they haven't really done anything that's corrupt, really. Like the closest you can maybe come is like, you'd have to go on some mad moral angle. Like, I do think it is insane that everyone just was cool with Reginald, just literally like bullying people to tears. I'll never get over that, mate. I'll never be able to understand how that's fine. But apparently it just is in this world. So that's not really what people mean by corruption. Do they mean like, you know, like tampering and stuff like that?
All right. Kozja asks, what do you think is the sweet spot between oversaturation of international play and the current lack of it in League of Legends? Well, in my world, you can't have an oversaturation of international play. So I just don't like the regionalized system.
You basically can't, right? Which is a mad controversial take, because if you go into my game, CSGO, everyone would have just told you for the last like 7 years, it's all too much. Like, basically, here's the problem, right? If you really are hardcore about the game, it's impossible. Like, I'm not joking. If I had the best Counter-Strike LAN every 2 weeks with the same top 4 teams, I'd watch it every day till I died, and I'd never be bored, because it won't be interested in the meta game, the back and forth. The teams are so good that they make great matches. But I will say, like, the sweet spot should be somewhere between League of Legends and CSGO, just for in terms of like making most people happy. Like, if I had to pick, I've always said, like, to me, the missed opportunity, it's an old school reference, but was what actually the CPL tried to do back in the day when they did Painkiller that 1 year, where they just did a Formula One circuit. There was like 10 stops. One was the grand finals. The others were like circuit spots. There was one per month as it went through the year. And what you did was the same people just traveled like Formula One from one circuit spot to the next one. Then you played that one, then a month later. So you've had a few months off, a few weeks off to, you know, build storylines, like have back and forth, analyze. And then you go in the next month, you have another one with the same top teams. And at the end, you have the big championship. It was just actually a format that I thought was fantastic. It had like just enough to keep you into it and sort of marking it on your calendar, but it wasn't oversaturated and you weren't blown away. So every day you feel like you're missing games, and it was consistent with the competition, and you could kind of see, like, this guy was 4th when we started the circuit halfway and he got to 2nd. Like, it was actually fantastic for everything, the storytelling, competition. So, and the problem with that is you need either a dev run game like this where they can decide the circuit, because you can't do it in an open circuit. Basically, like, they're all just going to battle each other as they do in Counter-Strike and take each other's space. So the problem is you need a game dev that gets it. And so far, I've never seen any game dev that did. Blizzard came a little bit close where they implied they were going to do something like that with Overwatch League, but then obviously they couldn't just logistically get it off the ground with what's going on the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think the best case scenario would be that you do have independent tournament operators who can kind of like make their own style and flair, but you have a dev that regulates the circuit so that it, you know, nobody's like stepping on each other's toes and the games aren't happening too frequently. That would be my preference personally. Crazy Leprechaun, how can someone get into the league scene? Used to watch play Smite. You know how MOBAs theoretically work. You have to play the game, dude. There's 160 different champions right now. If you don't have a fundamental understanding, it is completely unwatchable. Unfortunately,
it's probably the worst esports game. Literally, like, it's even worse than Dota 2, because I've always thought in Dota 2, actually some of the graphics are like semi-intuitive. I can kind of figure out, you know, what's going on, because that was one of the games I never played. League, I actually think, is the worst game if you never played it to intuitively figure out. Like, you'll almost never get there, dude. Like, certain things just won't, like, because one of the problems I've always said is the graphics of half of what throw you off. Like, some of those graphics look like the spell's amazing, or like, holy shit, this move, and then you find out, like, actually that does almost nothing. You're like, what?
Think about it this way. Like, League of Legends esports conversion, viewership wise, from players is actually legit terrible. Like, there's like 100 million people that play this game, and it's, you know, a very good day at Worlds is, you know, 1 million concurrent viewers in the West. So even people who play the game actively are not typically active watchers of this game. And if you compare that to like Counter-Strike or StarCraft or games that are kind of easier to understand, at least from a casual viewership perspective, but basically, if you're not a player, it's almost, I would say, impossible. And the reason why League Esports is as big as it is because it has such an enormous player base. So I guess if you really want to, you can get into like playing it, but otherwise I think it's really hard.
My angle would be this: if you want the fast track bearing in mind, unlike other games like StarCraft, I can't just say just watch the best player and then hope that you like. What I would do is this: just play the game a little bit, play any role, just play it randomly. Use guides, and then just figure out which role you like the best and what champions you like, and just look on these online websites at which pro players are playing those champions. Just have a look at the game and like, see if you can get into it at all. So if you like play jungle and you like a guy who's a gank, then go and look who the best LPL jungler is or whatever.
And the funny thing about the development of League of Legends too is that, back in the day, it was true that runes were kind of useless and like mastery trees were not super interesting. But now runes and like the rune system is much more interesting, but it also just adds more junk on the screen that you have to understand. Like now you have to understand all like the keystone like runes and stuff like that. So in a way, they've made it even more difficult for viewers to get into or like to even understand what's going on. So it's rough. It's rough. What's your favorite type of alcoholic drink? Angry Child asks. I have many. I used to be a cocktail bartender. I love whiskey and gin a lot. But my favorite scotch is probably Bowmore. But I like a lot of different Isla and island scotches, island malts. I like rye whiskey a lot. My go-to kind now is High West Double Rye. It's excellent. Very spicy rye. So those are kind of my go-tos in short form. Do you have any?
I'm not really a big alcohol fan. Like I'll say, I think most alcohol tastes terrible, so I don't drink it for the taste. So actually, one of my favorite drinks is actually one of the few that I would literally drink even if it had no alcohol in, which is an amaretto sour. Like I think it's just a delicious drink. It just tastes really sweet and just goes down super easy.
See, I have an alcohol vice and Thorin has a sugar vice. So
there you go.
All right. When are you showing up on an episode of Hotline League? Probably never. All right.
We never get the invite. Believe it or not, guys, it's an invite-only show unless you call in. And the problem is if you call in, there's not going to fucking pick up, are they? So there's no point.
I tried to call in one time and they wouldn't pick up. So I kind of just quit after that. Quit trying. Just quit trying. All right. Those are your questions, guys. If you want to ask questions in the Grog coin, 25. If you hold 25,
we'll be doing this every time, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, and we'll probably do it with Four Horsemen as well. It's a good way to support the show, guys. Appreciate it. We'll be trying to roll out new and other fun ways to do the Grog coin stuff in the future. Join the Discord, regardless, though, which you can get into, have some conversations. There's like over 1,000 people in there already discussing all of the various games. I'll put the link below for the YouTube video as well. So thanks a lot. We've had a nice long episode. We'll be back with LCS and LEC finals talk next week. Hopefully we'll get some LCK in there too. And then after that, I think Nelson said he would come on for LPL finals the week after that. So fortunately, LPL finals are a different weekend, so we can kind of do more of a dive into that. All right. Thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you same time next week.